hard a lot, but not to.
Yeah, fair enough. It's
Yeah.
funny when you turn 30, you have this like thing that weighs on you that I'm old now. It's not really that you're old. It's more that I'm an adult. You have this feeling that okay, so I can't be a 20-something anymore. But the positive thing of that is you can't be held to the standard of a 20-something. You do have to. There is a sense that you have to be a bit more mature, but there's also less of a burden on you to be young. The expectation that what you do is young, is youthful. But I'm also reminded, and I have been over this last year, that I still am pretty damn young in the grand scheme of things. So it's funny when you think back.
Meh.
Abram, you're having some sound issues. We're not able to make sense of what you're saying. Sorry, bud. Welcome, everybody who just came into the room.
Yes, punking bullies. It can be very fun. Oh, too fun almost. You know, perhaps it has something to do with empathy of the weak, empathy to the weak. Um, Surely we can empathize with being bullied, with tears,
Well,
with that horrible feeling of being bullied. And to come across a bully, no matter what stripe, no matter if they're an old lady or a 14-year-old, come across a bully, uh, it can be tempting, based on that pain that we all remember. It can be tempting to inflict a little poetic justice. Yeah.
sure. I like to think of that sort of punking the bully as a familial affectation. Whether or not you grew up in a family with a bunch of siblings, you likely had nieces, nephews, cousins, or friends of family, and you were at big gatherings, and you were in this sort of middle child scenario, whether you were an actual middle child or whatever, and you had an older child, adults, even a parent who was bullying a younger sibling or putting them in a horrible situation, or often the opposite when a younger kid thought, I'm going to do this stuff to fuck with my grandfather or whatever the case may be. And I think as a part of a family unit, using it as an analog to a lot of our social experiences, because ultimately that's where it all starts, is with our family experiences. I think everyone has been in that sort of situation before. You have to have a functioning family unit. If you can't have a repartee, if you can't have that kind of back and forth between family members where you can both be consoling and sympathetic while also being a little harsh, you're not really going to have a closeness. I've made the point that sometimes the people that you can be the most angry at are the people you're closest to, whether that's a brother or a sister or a really close friend. And I think that's a good thing because there are things sometimes that people need to be told, and one of the best ways to tell them that is harshly. And if you can tell something to someone harshly within the context of a close relationship among friends, I think that's a really good way. It's a good vessel for getting out some of that information that maybe somebody needs to gain a little perspective. And I've both been on the giving and receiving end of that many times. Well, that's good, Alfred. I'm glad that it's not like a regular thing. You don't want to have a family that's full of argument all the time. Drama is never a good thing in excess, but it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. You have a family member who gets with somebody new, has a new boyfriend or girlfriend, gets a brand new car, and is pushing it on everyone else, bragging for their new sense of wealth or power or whatever the case may be. It eventually, at some point, is going to cause some amount of drama. What I actually find is when it's unvocalized drama, when it's silent judgment, it actually tends to be more damaging than when it isn't vocalized initially. Sometimes you need to get that shit out on the table, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
about what you said about bullying, that comes into play in work teams too. I was in charge of training a new guy since I'd been there for quite some time, and I had to go through the whole thing with him about integrating him in with the team because our particular company cares a lot about line culture and team culture and that whole sort of thing. And I said, these people are going to be on you until you make the grade, until you get over the hump. And then once you start taking that bullying a little bit, and once you start using humor and things like that, you make them laugh, then you become part of the system, and they use it as coping and teaching skills. And sometimes you might even be blamed for stuff you didn't do because you end up being, say, the scapegoat or the pressure relief valve for the team because everybody else has already been through it, and you end up being the relief valve for that certain period of time of the initiation idea of it, So once in a while, like, he'd be very discouraged in things that were going on. Maybe he felt he wasn't learning fast enough, whatever. I had to say, no. This is part of the process, and this is how they deal with that. They might not be able to cope very well with some of the issues they're trying to work through in a work environment, just troubleshooting and things like that on a tough day. So they may use you as some kind of pressure relief valve for a certain period of time until you become part of the team. And there's so much learning to that with interpersonal relationships and give and take, like even like you were saying before, in warrior cultures, it was that bullying and playing and stuff, even with animals, that build up a type of resistance to the kind of things that you might face, not a resistance, but coping skills that you might face out there, because you're not sure what's out there. And the here and now is supposed to prepare you for that in some way. And however, I think sometimes maybe society messed that up. I don't know if they did or not.
Well, I think it's a dynamic system. So
we all feel good when, say, for example, the YouTube videos on responding to bullies, where the little kid, gives him a knock at this kid who might have been picking on him every day to take off his pants in the lunchroom, and the kid knocks him down. The video goes viral, right? Everybody loves that. But in real life, there's so many people who can't do that because of the social structures that we've created for some reason. I don't know, where that would go.
Well, I think that there's something to be said for, I guess, what you could call artificial structures that are built around specific societies and brackets or areas of socioeconomic status. But some of that is actually inherent to human beings as a whole. We are high-brained mammals, so we have very different, diverse, pluralistic experiences. There's different temperaments, there's different personalities, and people channel those temperaments into different vocations, into different passions, different expressions, which again is made even more complex with cultural mindsets and attitudes and where you are in social status. So I don't think that you can really relegate any of these sorts of things, particularly when you're looking at dysfunction, to any one specific area or one aspect. There's actually a saying in a lot of medicine that, when you hear this all the time, preventative medicine, it actually highlights an idea that you can't only look at dysfunction in medicine, you also have to look at function. That interrelationship between how things are functioning, how they work when they are functioning, is also just as important as when they're not functioning. And that requires a much better, much more robust understanding of the dynamics that are at play. It was interesting, you were mentioning sort of the dynamic of the workplace and the competitive aspect, looking at tribal societies and how the tribe functions as a unit. When you're talking about, getting over the hump, I immediately am reminded of the learning curve. And that is a common trope that's used in gaming circles among people who play video games, particularly multiplayer. And you're actually starting to see game theory being applied to some of these social dynamics in a very interesting way, which I find entirely ironic considering the aspect of gaming being relegated to a very minority kind of a taboo almost culture, that people who play games are derivative or primitive or immature, which is almost also horribly ironic when looking at social dynamics we're constantly reminded of our childhood and adolescence. Oftentimes we neglect childhood development. So it's horribly ironic to me that gaming as a sort of method for exploration of a competitive environment and social dynamics for adult life does get us back to the core element of who we are when we're forming. Because it's not just function and dysfunction, it's also development. And we're always developing, we're always evolving.
Well, Mr. Alford, by the way, I'm St. Tommy. Allow me to introduce myself. Good to meet you, sir. I liked what you said about looking for the motives of group bullying, looking for the function of it, the practical function of it. Why? Why does one bully? Why does one tag team bully in a group? I like that, to look for motives, to look for what the payoff is of a bully. Yum.
I do also think it stands to reason that when you're looking at bullying as a happening, as a thing, as an occurrence, as a regular occurrence in all levels of social development, it doesn't always have a clear payoff. Think of this for a second. You ever hear people talking about child development when they're talking about children craving attention and they're applying negative attention? They're doing something to act out. Sometimes when you don't have stimulation, one of the best ways to achieve some level of stimulation is to create disorder, to create chaos. Even if it ultimately is maladaptive, it's a means to which to get out of a stagnancy, out of a level of interaction that has become stifled, that has become restricted. And it's not always the classic understanding the bully comes from a broken home and is beating up other kids because they've been beat up by their father. Many bullies have a whole host of different reasons for why they bully, whether we're talking of a child or a grown adult. Largely, it's because of a lack of fulfillment in some of those areas. And studies that people have been able to conduct over the last few decades that talk about addiction has very similar results. People who lack intimacy are usually those who seek out negative engagements. They seek out negative activities as a means to, as a sort of band-aid. It's almost like when you have a wound or you're in pain, you apply pressure to it as a sort of stopgap for the experience of pain that you're experiencing.
Yeah, often. Oh, go ahead if you're going to jump in. Go ahead, buddy.
It beats the shit out of feeling like a ghost, out of feeling a desperate loneliness, to lash out recklessly or with bravado it breaks that intense feeling of on the verge of crying, lonely. Yeah.
Angst.
Mm.
That word doesn't just go away when you turn 18. Everybody experiences angst. It's really only that as children and adolescents, we're first confronted with angst. It's the penultimate existential emotion. It's a little bit of anxiety, it's a little bit of fear, it's a little bit of anger, it's a little bit of loneliness, and we always experience it. Dealing with that angst is a part of living. I think it's interesting though when you look at some of this stuff because it's hard to put some of these ideas into words because they're things that we experience on a regular basis. Okay, I got my thought again. I think a part of the reason why bullying is becoming so highlighted is for the very reasons you just described. Loneliness. The world is becoming immeasurably bigger, largely because of technologies. People are constantly inundated with information, with ideas, with messages from media that we have now because of the internet and its huge growth of size and its ability to transmit information between different sources. I think that's heightening the feeling of isolation that people feel. It's ironic because you would think it would actually increase connections and make people feel more a part of a larger world. But I think the side effect of that is it can also make people feel even more isolated. So I think that's the thing. It's like you might listen to a song and have a positive experience, whereas another person might have a totally negative experience. So what we need to look at is what is the climate of individuals, their emotional matrix, that stimulates them to have a different experience of some of these social media examinations, these sort of social media experiences.
Yeah, what I was thinking about is, especially in the workplace again, because this is like a good model for it, and maybe also in like a religious setting. I want to first talk about how people tolerate more people and different kinds of ideas and things, maybe in a group setting or in a work setting, where you all have to cooperate on a project no matter what, where the end goal is development of the product or project as collaboration. And also, like outside of that, how people outside of that have issues with other people. It's amazing. And the second thing, really quick, is the view of leadership and how leadership is viewed by the team. And it's really fascinating, like the dynamic. Like, I can be on a work team with somebody that I know who is racist. Outside of work, oh, they hate it. Like, they go off. But you know what? You come in, they collaborate fine with say, an Indian or African American manager, very educated, all that kind of stuff. Collaborate fine, you know. But outside the workplace, it just seems to all fall to pieces. Or, you know, you take it in a church environment where, you know, they might have issues with other types of groups or beliefs. Throw them in a church situation where, oh, we all love everybody. This is an environment of this, where it's dictated to them what they need to do, and they can comply. They can comply for a certain period of time within that environment and be perfectly fine for a while. You know, it's just amazing to me. But also too, with bullying, I think that getting onto the leadership thing, I think that if you're a manager or leadership, or you're a president of something, or you're an overseer of a group or community or whatever, you have to allow a certain amount of criticism to come up from the bottom and blow it off, as long as the goals are being met. Like, sometimes at work, my team, oh, they're terrible. They talk about leadership all the time, you know, totally virulent. It would make you feel like a bad day. But I constantly have to ask the question, they're saying all this stuff, but are things running smoothly? And the answer is yes. So I'm saying, okay, maybe the leadership is a symbolic, as I was saying before, a pressure valve or scapegoat, that if that leader were to hear that, he needs to blow that off, because he needs to come on the floor, ask, is everybody doing what they need to do? Is everybody in their roles functioning as they should and developing as they should? And is there anything that I can do to help the team? Whether they like me or not is irrelevant, as long as the process is flowing along. You know, like, I find that very interesting. I know some people who, you know, may have heard some things or whatever, and got pulled in and said, by leadership, and said, hey, you know, we heard this and this and this going around. You know, I didn't think that that was right. I think that as a leader, you have to expect a certain amount of criticism and be able to take that, you know. And I often think when I studied Native American history and religion, a lot of times during the forced assimilation policies that the United States was doing, and also when the Native Americans were fighting their lands against the settlers, you had a lot of that where it was, you know, hey, how come we can't go in and just raid all these people and kill them all off? Because we do not want them here. They would say, hold back, you know, let's do this and this. And sometimes their leaders were called, you know, hang around the fort people. They saw, you know, taking deals from Washington, when the good of the whole community, you know, may have had interest in doing that. You know, there were some underneath who still had criticisms, you know, and kind of bullied leadership into doing things that may have been destructive for the group. You know, it's fascinating.
The role of a drill sergeant is not to be very kind, to create crybabies, or to create a crybaby habit, or to create a sense of entitlement habit. The kindness manifested by a drill sergeant is perhaps a little subtle. Perhaps it's kind to lead without consideration of criticism, without consideration of superficial kindness. To beef up somebody that one is charged with beefing up. Perhaps hyper kid gloves may not be apt. I was raised to esteem kindness and gentleness and courteousness very highly, very highly. That if you had to say, well, never mind, you would say it with a smile, very subtly, and at the cost of candidness. Anyway, yeah, man, drill sergeant, underrated. It's a fine line to do it well, but truly.
I think that echoes back to some of our earliest kinds of leaders, our chieftain. If you're, you know, in charge of a tribe, what is your primary concern? Survival. Survival of the group. However that manifests in whatever variety you're looking at. So you ultimately have to sacrifice maybe the particular concerns or personal sense of pleasure or happiness or fulfillment for the group as a whole. But I also think, and I kind of wanted to mention earlier with some of the things that Alfred was saying, I think that multiple selves theory as a psychological model it makes a lot of sense, and it's something that we all kind of understand. The way that you behave around family is different than how you behave around friends, and it's different than how you are at the workplace, and different than how you are in a survival situation or in a military situation. You're ultimately the same person, but there are different aspects that are produced. And look at this word, arbitrary versus arbitration. We have this sort of connotation of arbitrary being a sort of meaningless attribution of idea, concept, or structure, but it's arbitrative in nature. That is to say that classes, social classes, or even full-on castes do have a purpose in social structures for the very reasons that we talked about earlier. That people have different temperaments, people have different personalities, they have different strengths and weaknesses. That's why certain people get into business and other people get into war. Other people get into the writing of poetry or the creation of art. And other people are leaders, other people are administrative or political. And there are some people, and I'm not trying to argue necessarily a full-on Hobbesian philosophy here, but there are some people who are just better leaders.
Yeah, and sometimes it's perfectly fine to play Hamlet in a situation. So you don't get volunteered to do things or found out that you might know something that you might not want to know because you would be responsible for something.
Absolutely. I think a lot of our examinations of social dynamics, they're applied retroactively. We apply a lot of our modern biases to other cultures, to ancient cultures, to ancient civilizations, or historical aspects, sometimes not all that far back in our past, and assuming that some of the same things that make sense in our civilization make sense in theirs when they don't. And also different social dynamics in different aspects of modern culture. You know, and I think it's interesting, like I was saying, with the idea of applying game theory to business or game theory to social dynamics. But that's not always going to work. You're simply not going to have the same kind of interaction you're going to have with somebody at a business environment that you're going to have at a video game. And you're not going to have the same kind of interaction with a family member as you're going to have with somebody at a show, at a concert, if you're listening to music or something to that effect. They're just different dynamics. And I think this highlights an idea that I've touched on a few times in some of these discussions, because ultimately when you're talking about religious studies, you're ultimately talking about philosophy, is so many people misunderstand criticism. I think a lot of people just think that criticism is being critical. That's not what it is. Criticism is a branch of philosophy that attempts to apply disparate, divergent ideas together. So, for instance, applying women's studies to comic books. That would be an example of proper criticism. I could also apply psychology to religion, which has been done. I think so few people don't actually use criticism properly because they don't study logic. They don't have a decent basic understanding of how logic works. So they feel that it's the job of a logician to just be critical, to criticize everything, that examination is a negativistic context. And I think that highlights people's distrust for intellectuals in general. And you really see that in modern culture. And I think that's a part of the reason why, with the growth of technology, that we're hitting this sort of impasse, because for the last 50 years, we've viewed intellectuals from this sort of context of being weird or being assholes or just being people that you don't like, which I find horribly ironic, because only a few decades before that, nerds were viewed in a very different way. In fact, the people that were developing the technology of the atom were romanticized to such an extent that that's basically where we get the idea of Bond. James Bond is definitely a sort of archetype of that, of somebody who's incredibly intelligent, who's incredibly physically fit, who is able to deal with the kinds of things that not every ordinary person can. And you look at a lot of the sort of comics and propaganda material from that period, from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and that was how nerds were designed. I mean, just imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger in a lab coat, and that's basically how the nerd was viewed. But by the time we got to the golden era, the 50s and 60s, and everything was good, the post-war era, that wasn't needed. What you needed were people who could do working class jobs, who were physically fit, who were more about the family than they were necessarily the the dry and high-minded sort of intellectual aspect. So, and I think we're coming to another point in our history where that's being subverted. That golden era sort of concept is being subverted, because what you need now to survive in the modern era, whether you're actually in science or business or just socializing with other people in your community, you have to have a much better understanding of technology. Even the regular dude has to have better understanding of these nerdy intellectual ideas.
Yeah, I just finished a book by Ernest Becker, Escape from Evil, and I liked it so much I had to get his book, Denial of Death, which was his main book. But he talked quite a bit about that. The idea of coming to terms with person's existence and living beyond through the community, things like that. Like that book was pretty amazing. And what was funny is when I was reading that, I was having a lot of trouble on the team, and it totally explained everything I needed to know. And just by knowing it, I felt better about going to work. And I explained it to my new guy, and it was crazy. Like, it hit the nail right on the head on what was going on. And now he's able to understand it, and he handles a lot of things a lot better. And I think a lot of times just knowing, the scenario or the game board allows you to play it better.
Oh, absolutely. And though I was obviously talking about the modern affectation of video games, this idea of gaming and competition as a mode from which to explore social dynamics is ancient. I mean, you think about how many leaders, whether they were military tacticians or aristocracy, were taught how to be able to play chess and play chess effectively, be able to compete. It was used as almost as a philosophical examination of how structures are, knowing that sometimes you have to sacrifice a key piece in order to win. That's a valuable part of being a part of any team. So I find it really interesting, and you can learn a lot from some of these older things that we just overlook. That chessboard that you have lying in the corner, and there's a whole history behind that, going into the Renaissance and Middle Ages and all the way back into India, where it came from. And in backgammon actually comes from ancient Persia. So similar kind of thing going on.
Good evening, guys. Sorry I'm late.
Don't even worry about it. We're just glad you're here.
Yeah, I was down at the spa. I'm currently at a hotel right now, and it's sort of nice for work reasons. I'm going to be here all this week and then the following week, and then halfway through next week.
Good for you, man. I'm glad. We were just talking about social dynamics. We talked about how it applies in the workplace, how it applies in families, and we were getting on the idea of competition. We were talking a bit about bullying and where some of those ideas kind of come from, and we ended up talking about criticism, applying different ideas to different schools of thought, being able to examine them genuinely, and that ultimately comes down to a good understanding of logic. When it seems that a lot of intellectualisms are looked at negatively, that ultimately to have a intellectual examination of something has to ultimately be negative. It has to be pessimistic, and it can't be something that all people can engage in, which I think is a real big shame. I was talking about how our views of intellectuals, the sort of nerd archetype coming out of post-war 50s and 60s, is sort of a dead trope. And we're getting to a point now with society, with technology growing as it is, that some of these old holdout ideas of intellectualism are becoming subverted because surviving in the world, interacting in the world, requires even the average individual to be able to have a better understanding of just technology in general, if not the social dynamic of that it allows and encourages.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways the whole nerd caricature and sports caricature has sort of been reversed. Um, you know, it seems to me a lot more people can relate with, having to tutor the young athlete just to get him through college, than the nerd seems to fly by without it just there's a reversal of roles from back then.
I think that there's some positive aspects to that subversion, though. I've met and I interact with geek culture. I'm part of a lot of different groups, both physical and non-physical, and I'm seeing people who are part of geek culture who can more broadly understand it. There's different things that you can geek on. And many of my friends who are the sort of classic archetype have broken that mold, are spending more time taking care of their body, being physical, being active, spending their time with their diet. And conversely, a lot of the people who go on the more kinesthetic aspect can see both that their very focus itself is nerdy in a sort of classical definition, but ultimately that there is an intellectual aspect to it. Perfect example of this, if anybody's ever been to a college, there's a kinesiology lab in a lot of big colleges, understanding how the body works, understanding, biology, understanding nutrition, and all these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is more topical, like I said, that bodybuilding is itself almost like a geek culture. People get super passionate about it and know tons of details about how to do a proper workout, how there's different ways of working out and building different body types. Yeah. But also down to the almost totally mundane things, like you talk to a geek who wants to go to conventions and wants to cosplay. Well, they want to cosplay appropriately, so maybe they should get into some better shape so that they fit the role. I mean, little things like that seem provincial, they seem mundane, but it's showing that people can have a much more broad understanding, that is, of the way we define things now. Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately, though right now it's a little jarring and there's a lot of contention going on with this aspect, ultimately I think it's going to help people grow and develop more than perhaps they were able to over the last 20 years, more or less the last 50.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk to people in their 50s and 60s on a regular basis. Many of them are family members and friends of my parents. And some of them, they just have this wonderful perspective on these technologies, the new things that we're able to do. And they tell me on a regular basis, wow, this allows me to do all the things that I really like to do on a regular basis much easier than I was able to do even 5 years ago. So I think there are positives, and we shouldn't just assume that people are going to have a particular opinion based on their socioeconomic status, their race, their gender, whatever. There's totally different ways of approaching things, and ultimately it comes down to application. When you look at any science, when you look at any discipline, applied blank is the most important thing. It's one thing to have a general understanding of a subject. It's more important to have critical thinking and to be able to apply that understanding to a real, practical purpose. Otherwise, it's just memorization. You look tired, my friend.
Yeah, just 30 minutes relaxing in the hot tub. So.
Oh, those endorphins, man. They have a way to knock you on your feet.
Yeah.
Knock you off your feet, that is. But yeah.
I'm feeling really mellow though, so I like that.
Oh, it's good. It's
a nice change. So, I brought myself some ginger beers and some good mule mix. So we've been cool. pretty good here.
I bet.
So I wanted to bring up this topic with this specific group. I don't think I have before, but I did 2 recent blog posts on theonomy.
I think you mentioned it. Doesn't that have something to do with dominionism?
Yeah, it did. And I was just, wondering, like, I guess what shocked me when I sort of started making these posts is how many people really support this idea of bringing the Mosaic civil code that was given to Israel into American society. And I've been thinking about, like, I don't want the fact that these people exist to start shaping my thinking to, like, take me off my focus with that. But at the same time, it's like...
You'd like to address some of the things they're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like everything that I say, oh, there's an explanation for that. You're misinterpreting the great, 5, 6, 7 volume work that discusses that topic. And with no real arguments against it. Like, the one guy who's sort of head of this, talked about in a debate. Oh, those are just boogeyman quotes. You can't trust what those are, just straw men. And it's like, I think this is a problem with arguments over the internet. It's this tendency to paint
relegate everything to a semantic.
Disagrees with you.
Okay, absolutely. People just like being semantic, and they don't realize they're being semantic when they're saying it. Oh, you're being pedantic, you're being semantic, whatever the case may be. It's this obfuscation of language. People love to use the obfuscation of language. Let me ask you a question. It's sort of a piece of advice here. You go to college, right?
I'm graduated.
Okay. So have you ever done a PowerPoint presentation?
Many.
And there's obviously a point where you're fielding questions based on the material you presented, right?
Oh, yeah.
What is probably the best thing that you can do when you have a structured PowerPoint presentation and questions are asked?
Anticipate the questions in the PowerPoint and make a good presentation.
Yes. So make sure that your material is thorough. If necessary, make sure that you've cited sources when available. But I would also say, as an extension of that, is that when questions are asked, refer to the material that you presented. So as a way to correlate the future discussions and the future threads on a blog post to your original material. So you always have the foundational element. So you can track and monitor these things. And looking at it in the grand scheme, you have a blog and you have many different posts and responses applied to it, and you're fielding those questions in term and within structure of the core blog. And you can take those elements, even write them down, even take the transcripts and write them down. And you can use those questions, put them together as a gestalt, and create a new blog post that continues on the previous thought. And in so doing, you're reinforcing the ideas that you're trying to do in a meaningful way that's not semantic, that isn't using logical fallacies or appeals to emotions or appeals to this or whatever, in a consistent way. So as you continue, you not only are able to teach other people your own perspective, but you're also able to learn as well. Because ultimately, any examination of an idea is reciprocal. You're both instructing and learning at the same time. Truth be damned, whatever the case may be, you suspend disbelief for whatever the truth statement might actually be at the end of the day, and you're able to examine it in a clearly objective manner as much as you possibly can. So I think you're already doing what you should be, and from our discussions, you have a very thorough method. So I do think that at a certain point, though, you have to look at the character of some of the responses, and you have to make a judgment call. At some point, you're going to look at material that somebody's putting out, and it's clearly not logical. There are going to be certain things that people respond to you in an internet environment that it's keyboard bravery. They know that there's no real recourse for what they're saying. It's gibberish, it's garbage, and sometimes you just have to flat out ignore certain things. because it playing into them, engaging them, is not going to help anyone. It's not going to help them, and it's not going to help you.
And that's what I foresee as the problem, is just giving them a voice.
Exactly.
That's the issue. I think the next...
Yeah, just jumping in real quick, you should never make a video to your haters. Oh, they love it. They will never stop. They would be all over it. And you should always be online for the things that you want to do and for your own enjoyment.
Yes.
Because you could have a group of subscribers totally run a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, demand things from the user to
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, what do you guys want to see?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden your creativity is totally gone. So also, what I learned to do, for every 500 subscribers, there's probably at least one crazy, right?
Yes.
And the more you have, they collect. So it's good to have a sense of humor about it, because if they see you not taking the issue very seriously, and you're having fun, which is the reason why you're online, because it's a hobby, you know, things like that. You're learning, meeting people, and keep that in the front of your mind, that even if you had one view or one click on your web page, you would still do it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that makes a world of difference, because a lot of people, they get pretty beat up, and I've seen channels closed down, websites taken down, you know, because of all the you know, trolling and stuff. It's just horrible.
Yeah.
I think there's almost an aspect with the people who are actually putting out material. They end up becoming almost entertainers, but not in a way that they like. They end up being forced into entertaining, almost in a sort of, you become like a minstrel. I hate to put it like that, but I've seen exactly what Alfred's describing, and then it's like, you know, dance, motherfucker. Like they're shooting guns at your feet.
No, and I noticed this tendency as well. I think it's you know, you do X, and for some reason X is the wave, and you get on that wave, and then there's another wave, and you get on that wave, and you've completely forgotten the main purpose of which you set out to do.
And once again, that's what it is. It's obfuscation. They want you to get caught up in wave after wave because they want to erode you. They want to erode what you have to say.
Yes.
For or against, it doesn't matter. Because most people don't really have much of an opinion about anything. They're just upset with the things that are coming out of your mouth.
Yeah.
And rather, well, troll you. Basically, that's all that is. People who are jaded and upset because people have ideas that are structured in some manner. A lot of times there's no real logical reason for them doing that to you. They're just upset. So being able to tell the difference, being able to discern, is a valuable part of putting out material online. And it's difficult, and you're going to have to constantly reassess on a regular basis. So I would say the one takeaway from this is take your time and and live your life, like Alfred's saying. It shouldn't be your end-all be-all, and if it does, that's not a positive way.
No, and it really isn't. It's something I do on the side.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess another thing I wanted to bring up was I was listening to a podcast, and it threw out a few statistics. One of them was, it was the statistics of different groups or denominations and their ministers, and who actually subscribes to the doctrine of inerrancy of Scripture, which is sort of one of the foundational orthodox doctrines of Christianity. And of Episcopalian ministers, 8% of ministers 55 and up believed in the inerrancy of Scripture, and of those 35 to 55, it was 4%. And I think this raises a wider question about, like, multiple religious movements, and sort of at what point do we go from this is a serious discussion of faith to this is a social club where we really like to discuss different symbols that are important to us, and potlucks on Sunday. So bring a dish. You know, it just, I mean, when I heard some of these statistics, I just wanted to crawl into a cave and die. I was really upset.
The Baptists make the best casseroles. Never forget that. It's awesome.
Well, I think there's some subtleties in that. Even if you were to put it to two wings, literalist versus figurativist, I suppose you could even call it as such. Within the more literal people who take the Bible to be literal as Word of God, there are people who are very hard line in that every single word is a literal aspect of Scripture.
Yeah,
I don't think that most people who would consider it inerrant word.
Yeah, that isn't what inerrancy is, though.
No, but there are people who do say that, and I'm sure you've interacted with those people.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's a very different understanding of inerrancy.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to realize that, and obviously on the other side of it, those who see things more symbolically, there are definitely people who are not hardline at that. But there are definitely people who are so hardline that it does seem like a social club. But that happens in almost any philosophical or religious group. You're going to have a spectrum, and largely it's going to be a bell curve. You're going to have a lot of people who are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think what interested me though is like the Episcopalians were so far gone with regard to that doctrine. When you looked at Lutherans or Methodists or other historic, groups, it wasn't near those statistics. I mean, you're still looking around 40, even in the most liberal denominations, at least 40% of ministers. Episcopalianism, I was just like, but then I don't know. I was invited to speak at an Episcopal church one time, and I gave a speech. And they really, really liked the speech. I did some sort of email communication with them afterwards, and they were thinking of bringing me back. And then they found out that I was a Calvinist, and they're just like, well, we can't have him there anymore.
Fair enough.
But,
oh, I love it. So you got booted by the Episcopalians for Calvinist views, huh?
well, I wasn't booted. I was just polite communication politely.
Politely conveyed.
Yes. Yeah, and that's, I mean, Episcopalianism, or the wider Anglican communion is a mess. I mean, last Easter I was looking up articles for the blog on Easter, and there were 2 articles by Anglican ministers in New Zealand, and one of them was arguing for the deity of Christ and the resurrection, and the other one was arguing against the deity of Christ and the resurrection. Both ministers. One believed in God, one didn't. I mean, it's a mess. It's a mess, and I think it goes to tell you, you can never really group someone in a specific group, even if they belong to us, even if they belong to one in name, because it can tell you very little about what they actually believe.
Well,
yeah, and that's a huge issue I think coming up. I picked up a hitchhiker because I seen him pushing his bike. We have a lot of hills around here. I felt bad for the poor sap, So I said, "Where are you going?" I had the bike rack on the back of the car. Put it on. Oh, next town. All right. So I take him there. He's a traveling preacher. So I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Because I always end up getting somehow with ministers and stuff. I don't know why that happens, but fate has it that way. And I said, so what denomination are you? And that's important to me.
Yeah, it is.
Like you're saying, because it creates talking points. Because I already know what a lot of the denominations, their background theological beliefs might be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can have productive conversations on that.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people are doing, and even in churches, they're moving out of denominational stuff, and they see it as a pride to say, oh, I'm interdenominational,
Yeah.
non-denominational.
Doctrine
Because
divides.
I think everybody should be a follower of Christ. So in a way, that's true what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But when you dig deeper, that's not truly what they believe.
No,
Because the
it is.
subtleties start to come out. And it's those subtleties that I'm really interested in. So, you see a lot of, especially New Life Church, a lot of maybe from, I don't know if Southern Baptists do that, but they start renting out warehouses, and they start renting out storefronts to get away from the traditional church view. So they can say, as a marketing point, as a point of proselytizing, hey, we're not like those other churches. You come to us, we're non-denominational. But when you get in there, even though the package has changed, the inside and the meal, the Happy Meal, is still the same. You still get the medium fries, the burger, and the medium Coke.
Yes.
And I was invited to a church. I'm always interested to go by some of my friends. And I went, and this is a different kind of church. This is interdenominational. Oh, it's fascinating. But it ended up being, this evangelical, straight up evangelical. I thought I was in a Baptist church.
Yeah.
Same belief system.
Yep.
You might have people getting away with different, say, dress codes and modesty codes and things like that. But in general, it's run the same as evangelicalism.
Yeah.
And that's just fascinating to me, why you would want to move out of that construct and not take pride in your denomination as you did in the past, highlight those subtleties, and a lot of times even the confessionals that are said in church, they were said so that you identified which subtleties you believed in, your particular denomination believed in. We believe the Father, this and that. And it's different from what the other denomination does. So I was taught that in my denomination. We weren't Pentecostal, we weren't Baptist, we weren't Calvinists. We were this. This is how we dressed, and this is how we identify one another. And I could go out in public, and I could see a Baptist, I could see a person carrying a Bible. But if he wasn't dressed a certain way, I could almost tell which denomination he was from. Very fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a thought about this, and I've had some personal experience because there's several members of my family, extended family, who have gone this route. Of them, I'm pretty sure my brother has gone with his wife. I think that this development of interdenominational, non-denominational, as it stands, has less necessarily to do with doctrine and more as a response to social dynamics. You have this idea in a lot of modern culture that's it's multiculturalism. It's a very common trope in post-millennial culture. And I think a lot of these people, and if you look at a lot of these churches, they are almost painfully mixed with all these, like as you mentioned, people from various different denominations, but also different socioeconomic status, different ethnic groups. I mean, there's much less of a homogeneity within the groups that would be characteristic of something that's more traditional. And I think they do so purposefully, like you're saying, as almost a talking point, as a marketing strategy to gather as many people as they can into their specific denomination. And it definitely feels disingenuous from the perspective of, a code of religious denomination. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Mind if I chime in for a sec?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, guys, by the way. And hello, Ruben. I know Ruben always types on the side there. I think also one of the things that you're going to find, at least that I found when you talk about churches that hold their services in warehouses or sporting goods stores, for wherever it happens to be, a trailer, a park, whatever. In addition, maybe to the marketing aspect of this, is a lot of times I'll find that the people there that are in leadership, that are the pastors, and I put that in quotations, don't have any real official training. They've not gone to seminary. They don't really understand theology themselves, which maybe is part of the reason they find themselves in that situation, is because there's not enough credibility there to really get accepted into a mainstream denomination as such, and so they're forced to sort of be the outliers.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I've been to a few non-denominational churches, and one of the things that did struck me is, I remember sitting and hearing this guy, yeah, I was out on my tractor one day, and God spoke to me, and he told me to go out and preach, and so I started preaching. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me right now. I'm never coming back here again. But, yeah, I mean, there's this, and actually, believe it or not, it is a more subversive bent. It's a very anti-authority, intellectual, I mean, I guess what Kevin was saying about this whole idea of being a response. I think non-denominationalism is really just, well, we can go out and do our own thing, and we don't need anyone else to tell us how to do and what to do and how to work. And I think it proves disastrous, because people commit their lives, in their service, on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights, and all sorts of church activities and things, and this is how Kool-Aid events start happening. It's serious, seriously, and I mean, a lot of times I've seen them go both ways. I mean, all sorts of ways. I mean, crazy charismatic, speaking in tongues, going convulsions on the floor sort of deal, and also, we're called to tithe, and they end up becoming farms, really, for money, and because of their hierarchical church government, and without any accountability in church government, it ends up becoming a corrupt corporation.
I think, and certainly in a lot of my conversations on Google+, and I should, for the record, let you know, I say I'm an atheist, so you know where I'm coming from. But I know in a lot of my conversations on Google+ with Christians or theists in general, half of the time I have to spend the first third of our time together telling them what they believe. Okay. Oh, you know what I mean. Good. Okay. So, I mean, I have to really correct their theology first and get them to an understanding of what, for example, historic Orthodox Christianity teaches, or Catholicism teaches, or if you're Lutheran, or whatever you are.
What's a creed? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. What's the Athanasian Creed? What's the Apostolic Creed?
Exactly.
Right. And I have to do that, and I think that actually struck home with me most potently, I guess, was during the last presidential election, where there seemed to be this debate in the Christian community as to whether Mormons were considered Christians. And this went, I can't tell you how many I mean, I don't have a dog in this race, I'm an atheist, but I can't tell you how many times I would get Christians on there who I knew were from a denomination that clearly would reject Mormonism as being a component of historic Christianity. And yet these people are like, oh, well, he believes in Jesus too, so he's a Christian too. And I'm like, oh my God, could we this is like trying to herd cats. Could we get some definition here somewhere? I don't really care what box you're in, but could we at least make a box?
No, I completely agree. And I got really frustrated because these are the same people who watch Glenn Beck. And Glenn Beck will say in his program, God bless you. And I'm like, he doesn't mean the same thing as what you're thinking he means when he says God bless you.
Thank you. Jonathan, you and I can be best buddies here. It's like, tell me what I said,
Yeah, or like Fox News will have Hagee on talking about his book, The Four Blood Moons and Prophecy. Here's a national news network. Why are they, giving a platform to these evangelical And I'm even surprised they let Huckabee go as far as they did, before he left to run for president. Like,
I know.
sometimes I would be watching Fox out of interest with the sound off for all the legs and pretty faces, but at the same time, I'm wondering why sometimes it felt like I was at evangelical church when I'm trying to get news information. It was amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but it is. I mean, words, the definitions to words are important if you want to have a dialogue. You've got to understand what the other person means, and they've got to be specific and stick with the definition. I don't really care. For example, I don't care how you define God, but let's at least come up with a working definition so we know what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're talking about inspiration of Scripture. Well, if we're talking about verbal plenary inspiration, that's one thing. If we're talking about a different form, that's a different ball of wax, and it has different repercussions. And so we need to define that before we can have a meaningful dialogue back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was 2 books I read put out by the Barna Group. I don't know if you've ever read anything from Dave Kinnaman. It's You Lost Me, Why Young Christians Are Leaving the Church and Rethinking Faith. And the other one was Unchristian, What a New Generation Really Thinks About Christianity.
Yeah.
And I guess the Barna Group does these surveys, for churches and evangelical groups. It was huge introspection there. Because a lot of times how they react to the public directly relates how their message is geared and proselytizing and evangelizing is geared. So as culture changes out there, like you were saying before, that they're almost forced to change, almost forced to go non-denominational, because some of the people, well, everybody's leaving now. They need the bucks, and the money seems to be in the herds, and the people seem to be in these non-denominational Generation Xers who are saying, hey, we're tired of this stuff, But at the same time, it seems they want structure. Fascinating,
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot about that. I did my whole speech for the Episcopal Church actually on statistics from the Barna Group and Pew Research.
What confidence level do you have in Pew Research?
I find that a lot, and it's a fallacy of population, but I find most major news networks, if they're looking for a good, reliable statistics, view Pew with a high degree of confidence, and because they're respected, I respect them. However, apart from that justification, I don't really have any.
It seems to me, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but looking at some of the things, both Pew and Gallup, but Pew in particular, yes. When you look at the questions, a lot of times it seems to me that the person who designed the questionnaire does not have a working knowledge, for example, of Christianity or religion in general, or they have a very superficial ones, because the questions seem to be very vague.
Yes.
And they don't seem to be written in a way to elicit a meaningful answer to somebody who is actually involved in that and looking for meaningful statistics.
Yeah.
Is that see the same way, or am I missing something?
No, I think that's true. I was very frustrated when I was looking through Pew to find something that spoke to a little bit of issues that matter to Christians specifically, and I couldn't find any. I mean, I think the statistic I used was just being affiliated with any religion. But other than that, I mean, apart from Barna, it's really hard to find decent statistics. And I mean, it's hard to use Barna because they are a evangelical organization with a specific mission. And I mean, it's part of a larger mission to raise awareness about these statistics that are there, that they're finding. And so, I mean, obviously everyone has a bias, but I wish there were 4 people who were like Barna but weren't Barna and were coming from different perspectives.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a little frustrating.
I haven't seen you before, Jonathan. Do you hang out and do much of the Google Hangouts, or is this just something you do,
Yeah.
for a specific group with Reuven?
Yeah, I do Interfaith here on Mondays. This is the one that I've chosen to commit to. If I pop in on any of the other Google Hangouts that he hosts, it's usually because I'm bored and have nothing else to do. But this is the one that I'm like, I'm going to go to this one. And so, yeah.
Okay, all right. I was just curious.
Mhm.
I take it you're aware of some of the nut jobs out there, then.
Very much so.
Okay, without mentioning any names. Yeah, we know. And they're on, and I should say they're on both sides of the fence. Okay, so.
No, they are. They are. Anyway. Yeah, I was yeah. Speaking of trying to figure out or demonstrate to Christians what they actually believe, if anyone is interested in learning about Christianity at all, I've been reading through this book. I'm about 2/3 of the way through. You're not going to be able to see it right because of the camera.
Basic Christianity, yeah.
Yeah, Basic Christianity, John Stott. It's a very, very good introduction to what the Christian faith means and what Christians actually believe.
Didn't C.S. Lewis do one by the same title?
C.S. Lewis did one called Mere Christianity.
Mere Christianity, thank you. Yeah.
And it was more about C.S. Lewis's attempt to bring his perspective, which is distinct, and make it, this is what Christianity is. And C.S. I love that book. It's one of my favorites. But you're getting a lot of C.S. Lewis in that book. I mean, obviously you're getting a lot of John Stott in this one, but C.S. Lewis has a distinct view on Christianity, and you especially get to see it with his approach. It's much more because he was or viewed himself as a non-believer for so long, who was an atheist for so long. His perspective is more shaped by his former self, and you see that in the book.
Do you think, if I can ask, I want to say this the right way. In some sense, to me, religions, denominations are very much like political parties. When people ask me, "Are you a Democrat? Are you are you a Republican? Are you whatever, a socialist, whatever?" I always find myself having to answer no because my political views tend to be taken piecemeal from various parties depending on the topic we're talking about. Yeah. So I can't really say I follow a party line. Within Christian denominations, do you think any particular denomination has nailed it in terms of their theology, or do you find, from whatever background you come, do you find that there are still components of your denomination that you would take issue with?
Yeah, I think I view a sort of a plurality, and so like within the wider Christian spectrum, we don't talk about like within I'm a member of the Presbyterian Church in America, and I am a regular attender of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. Okay. So OPC, PCA, they both came off of the original Presbyterian Church at different times in history. But when we talk about faith, we don't talk about the Christian faith all the time. We talk about the Reformed faith, and our language is a little bit different than the way other denominations view themselves. And so I guess it's. I mean, if I were to say like, have we nailed it? I would say, the true church is the PCA and the OPC. Yes, we both
Hence your tagline there. The church is always reforming. Is that
yes.
Okay?
And so I view myself as a Reformed Christian, and so within that umbrella, you've got Reformed confessional Baptists 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith. You've got Westminster Standards folks, which are the Presbyterians, and you get Heidelberg Catechism and Canons of Dort folks, who are your Dutch Reformed and your continental, or that continental form come to the United States. So you've got your Reformed Church in North America, a few other Reformed denominations are under that larger umbrella. And then beyond that umbrella is Protestantism, and then beyond that is Christianity. But again, Reformed ideas are, we talk about Reformed theology, and Reformed theology has a very ecumenical scope. And so, I've run into two Catholics on this group, Will, Herb, and Edouard, whose favorite theologian is R.C. Sproul, who's a Reformed theologian. And the Catholics view Calvinism as Augustinianism. They just give a different name to it. As far as like political parties, I would die for the Reformed faith. The fact that it is the Reformed faith, over and against non-denominational churches, over and against, I would fight in the religious wars. I will fight against Captain Fuckinger and his Catholic army and defend Zwingli before he got killed by him.
There was a book way back when by a guy named Walter Martin. He always used to refer to the internecine warfare of the church. And,
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, my.
Oh, yes. The Lutheran insulter. Classic.
The what?
The Lutheran insult generator that Alfred posted in the chat.
Oh, my. I gotta look at that.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta take off, guys. Carlton, nice seeing you. Nice meeting you there, John.
Yep.
Oh, hey, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't talk over you and come in kind of
No.
commandeer the room.
I like listening to you guys go on. So take care.
Okay, you too, bud. Take it easy. Have a good night. Looks like just you and me, John. Everybody else is muted out there.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, we can do that. Yeah, I think sometimes I get a burr up my butt, and when I do the Google Hangouts, there's nothing sometimes I like more than putting 2 or 3 Christians from Google in the same room, and then to come after the atheists, then watch them end up battling each other over doctrinal issues.
Yeah.
I used to do that when I was a Christian. 25 years or so I was a Christian.
Okay.
And I used to do a lot of evangelism, mostly Western cults, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness. And I know when I was in college, I used to do that occasionally. I'd get a big old reel-to-reel tape recorder on a Saturday, and I'd put it under my bed, on my bunk bed in my dorm room, and then I would call up and invite over the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses simultaneously. The recorder would be going. I would just sit on the bed and let the sparks fly. I would just, throw an occasional glass of gasoline on the fire.
When I was a kid, and maybe this is foretelling for my future. I don't know. When I was in high school, there was this girl who really liked me, who was Mormon, and so in order for us to go out, I had to go to Mormon church. So I prepared an entire list of things that are wrong with Mormonism, and went to church with her and argued with the Mormon missionaries for 3 hours straight, completely derailed their service.
Did this get you laid in the end? This is the only measurable stick that we've got here. Did it work?
She never called me over again.
I guess not so much.
I'm like, what do you guys do with Galatians? This whole no other gospel, let it be accursed. Just laying it down, every single.
That's funny.
And then in high school, we had a speech class, a human communication class or whatever. Yep. And I did my 5-minute speech, which ended up being 15 minutes, on why Mormonism isn't the same thing as what's in the Bible.
Right. To me, it seems painfully obvious, but okay.
Well, yeah, well, the thing is, as you pointed out, nobody actually studies this kind of stuff unless they're interested. So.
And I always, I mean, like I said, even as a Christian, and of course as an atheist, it's more of academic interest. But especially when I was a Christian, this was one of the things that always drove me nuts. It really did. I was like, how can you evangelize? How can you go out there and represent something that you yourself don't understand?
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand there's a level of sort of passion and youthful exuberance involved in this sometimes, and so a lot of times you don't have the academic background. You're just excited about what you're talking about, and that's fine. But it seems to continue on through old age. Those same people still don't really seem to grasp the issues. When I talk with theists, a lot of time as an atheist, we started this from different starting positions. But the best way to describe this is, I have friends who are theists, and I respect their position because they can articulate it well and they can defend it well. There are other people who are Christians who literally I laugh at and mock, and it's not, and they don't seem to get this. It's not because they're Christians. It's because they're I don't want to just say because they're stupid, but there seems to be a willing of sort of a virtuification, is that a word? They seem to turn ignorance into a virtue. They sort of take this fools for Christ totally the wrong way, and sort of turn it into that there's some hidden blessing in being ignorant and not being able to understand things.
No, I cannot tell you how many people who have told me, you're really just quashing the movement of the Spirit right now by bringing in all this doctrine. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Did God not bless you with reason at all?
No.
No. And I mean, I was shocked at because I tried to I was helping to lead an ecumenical on-campus organization. When I say ecumenical, I mean like
Campus Crusade type.
Under Christian umbrella. And it was just so hard to get them off of this evangelical mainline charismatic bent that says, all that matters is that we're here and we love each other and we're smacking each other's hiney's and it's great, and I just can't do that. I won't.
We're saying both. There's a guy, and I'll say his name because I don't think he would mind. Nate Cunningham's on here quite often, and Nate drives me nuts because usually we'll have these great conversations, and then as we kind of get down to the nitty gritty, all of a sudden he'll say, and I can see the banner over his head before he says it. He'll say, "Well, we're all on Team Jesus. It's all," and I'm like, "Oh God!" Every time you say that, I want to vomit, and I'm an atheist. Okay, what does that tell you? I'm like, really? Can we?
Yeah.
Yeah, and but I know, I kind of know that mindset. I don't understand it, but
yeah,
I don't know. Is it because these people are just? Is it because they're not being schooled well? In terms of
not that they're not being schooled well.
Apologetics, or
they're not being schooled at all.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Tendency. I mean, I've seen these churches, and what happens is anyone who has an inkling or an interest in leading ends up leading. It isn't based on any sort of theological learning. It's based on participation.
Right.
And it's really, really hard because these people they come to it's weird. Even the language that they use to describe their relationship with church, they talk about it as being fueled up or filled up, and as if church is the place where they come because their life is crap, and when they go into church they feel really good about themselves, and that helps them get through the week until the next Sunday. And that really bothers me as a Christian, because that is counter to what the gospel proclaims. The gospel proclaims a whole of life that is filled with the Spirit of God, and so it just drives me nuts. But it's a whole culture. And, I have to be careful because when people, especially when mainline evangelicals hear the word Calvinist, they automatically think this person is insane, this person believes in predestination, and so they're cold-hearted, and they really like to read Puritans, so they must be puritanical too. And it's just,
I haven't heard
really
puritanical get thrown into the mix yet, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me sometimes to relate with other Christians because I like to read Puritans. I think Puritans are great, and a lot of other things that the wider culture just sort of like doesn't understand or care to understand, or even just like the scholasts. The scholasts are ridiculed by any secular historian because they would argue about things as arcane as how many angels can dance at the
head of a pin, right?
Which they did argue about. But in its essence, though, that kind of stuff is very interesting because a lot of it was logical wordplay, and it was learning rhetoric, learning logic, and using ridiculous games to figure out how to craft better arguments. I really like all the writings of John Duns Scotus for how in-depth he is. But in our vernacular, dunce is a variation of John Duns Scotus's name.
Yeah.
So.
Sad commentary on our existence. It really is. I think as a Christian, when I was a Christian, I think probably one of the things that I in retrospect appreciated the most was similar to what you just mentioned, and that was the fact that Walter Martin was sort of the guy I got started with in terms of philosophy and apologetics, and then a lot of the other authors of the day, Francis Schaeffer, Watchman Nee, this group. One of the things I think that I got out of that, though, the most is exactly what you're saying. In doing apologetics, and in particular, Western cults, apologetics, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, that type, it sharpened my ability to have dialogue and to utilize logic and reason and be able to drill down, to the heart of a matter where there's a question. I'm with you. While I think, arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin is not. It's not productive in the sense that you're not going to get an answer that means anything, but it is productive in terms of the process to have the discussion.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people miss a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a great author. He works out of Fordham University. He's a professor of medieval history, and he did this book called Mysteries of the Middle Ages. I'm blanking on his name. But it's fantastic in sort of demonstrating that the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages, were really, there was a lot of developments, and it was not a time of backwardness. Thomas Cahill is his name, but really, really interesting. If you're into history, I mean, I definitely recommend it.
Okay. Hey, Reuben, I saw you typed it in. Oh, thank you. Somebody put a link there. Excellent. Why not? I can always use another book to read. Can I get it on?
Lots of pretty pictures too.
I was like, can I get it on Kindle? Probably. Save it here for the time being. There we go. Okay. You probably have had some dialogues with Matthew Bell.
Matthew.
Scottish guy from Glasgow. Christian, Calvinist. Very, very intelligent, very articulate. Can be a bit of a...
What was his last name?
Bell. B-E-L-L. As in bell curve.
Okay. Trying to think. I don't think I've ever heard of him.
No, you would. If you knew him, you would. Yeah, I don't think you'd forget.
Yeah.
He has some personality quirks. How's that? Is that nice? Is that politically correct? Yeah. But again, he's one of those people. He's very well read, and so I have to respect his arguments most of the time. He's wrong, but I still respect his arguments.
Well, you got to take a side.
Yeah, exactly. You be on my side, you can be wrong. It's it's not a hard decision.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was kidding.
Yeah, I've been I mean, the only UK guys that I know are really like Michael Ramsden,
Don't know.
and Alistair McGrath, John Lennox.
Huh. We definitely have a different group of. Let me add you to my list of people here, my circles, so I don't lose you.
Yeah. I mean, Michael Ramsden's interesting because he was originally one of the directors of the UN Economics something like it was one of those intergovernmental organizations, and he actually left his career in economics to do apologetics. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, Reuben's putting out a Matthew Bell bio over there. Yes, can get in your face. That's a very nice way of saying that. Right? What is your take on biblical literalism? Where do you?
Well, I mean, the way I understand biblical literalism is there are two camps, as you were saying. I do not believe in a literal understanding of the Bible without hermeneutics,
Okay.
Which is what, unfortunately, many fundamentalists hold to, is a literal, whatever interpretation I make is what matters. On the other hand, I mean, basically, the argument for the inerrancy of Scripture is based on what Christ said about Scripture, what Christ affirmed in Scripture about Scripture. And so because Christ uses the Old Testament as an authority, and he refers specifically to the law and the prophets, and what we have in the Old Testament canon today, basically, we uphold that, and we also uphold the New Testament as well, based on different passages in the epistles and things like that, with the full understanding of how that was created and how we came to a canon in Nicaea. And so, I mean, the way I look at it is the Bible is literal in that it communicates literal truth for literal people. It is not merely symbolic. It is not. It is telling, in a lot of ways, a history, and mingled with Psalter, mingled with all sorts of other things. But yeah. So I mean, I do view the Bible as being something that is true, in an objective sense.
If you don't mind, there's most conversations, at least the ones that I've end up being in, always seem at some juncture or another to end up at evolution. Sadly, but they do. I mean, certainly there is an obvious conflict for the person that is a strict literalist and looks at Genesis 1, Genesis 2, not as mythology, not as history, but as a literal accounting of the order of creation. Mm-hmm. I think even for the person that doesn't, there are issues with evolution in terms of sin and salvation. It gets wound up into the same thing. If there wasn't a literal Adam, then there wasn't a literal sin, then why do I need to be saved, and down the road. Where do you see? What's your take on that? Where do you come into that picture?
So I believe that creation is true. I also believe that evolution is true. Not evolution in the theory of origins. But it's a little bit more nuanced. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
The way I explain it is, I believe in providence as a Reformed Christian, and I also believe in the doctrine of concurrence.
The doctrine of
concurrence.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. So the doctrine of concurrence is a doctrine within the Reformed tradition that basically states that what God says wills, He actually does in the world, and He brings those things about by
various machinations. And so when God says, "Let there be light," we can observe in our astronomy how stars are formed, and it's amazing to me, and how every single element is manufactured from the birth and death of stars. And we are literally, and everything that we see is literally stardust that has been transformed over time. All from light. Let there be light. And so, I see I'm not a young Earth creationist, I'm an old Earth. I think we have pretty good evidence for that. I fully embrace, how solar systems are formed, formation of planetoids, those sorts of things that we observe in astronomical phenomena. As far as, the creation of life, I see no reason why it could not have been, it's really, really hard for people to embrace evolution as secular scientists in total because of the time issues, the amount of time that is needed for certain complex life forms to exist. And there's a whole host of explanations that try and get around that. I say providence. God actually, because God is directing life that way. And so the complexity that you see is in part from that process. As far as, there being, evolution, okay, well, how do you get to sin? The Bible talks about,
Right.
death not entering the world and things like that. And I am perfectly okay with, the Bible describes a place called the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden being a special place where God created Adam and Eve. And, I'm okay with that being a special place within this wider, earth that is where human beings come in arrive on the scene. Was that in the vessel of, a primate that was made, and I mean, the Bible talks about a breath of God moment, a breath of life that was breathed into Adam. Was that breath into a primate? I don't know, and Job gives me pretty good excuse why not to care, because God says, where were you, So I'm okay with that, and I'm okay with the ambiguity there, because it does me no good to argue that point. And at the end of the day, my faith doesn't stand or fall based on Genesis. It stands or falls based on Christ and His authority. And so I believe in the creation, not so much. I mean, I see how it makes sense to me, and I see, I can't understand evolution apart from God's providence because it is so directed. But
I think the only question there was that I had was that the last thing that you said, that my faith doesn't rise or fall on Genesis, but on the words of Christ. Pardon me for paraphrasing. Are you implying that there is more authority in the words that Christ spoke directly than those that we have recorded in the Old Testament?
No. What I'm trying to imply is that the specific nature of the Genesis account doesn't matter in so much as that Christ affirms it. And so, and the nature of who Christ is, being the supreme logos, being the foundation, the whole concept of Christ's existence before creation, and he says those things, before Abraham I was. There's a whole bunch of other passages where Christ refers to himself as existing from eternity. And I mean, he talks with authority about the creation because he was there at the beginning of the creation in perfect harmony with the Godhead. So.
Okay. Okay. Everybody else is so quiet. Hello?
I'm just listening.
Uh-oh. Oh, hey, Frank. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Frank, I totally did not understand the response you put on my Google post there a little while ago. I was going to add a comment, but I never got around to it. So
You need special eyes to understand that.
I thought I needed maybe those the Urim and the Thummim or whatever. I needed some special glass goggles, or I didn't know what I needed exactly there. But yeah, you were being exceptionally profound at that moment.
Oh, yeah. Now I don't understand what I wrote.
Good. Okay, then we're good. We're good. Oh, Lindsay's awfully quiet for Lindsay. Let's see. Kevin's there. Quiet.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Jordy's there. Hey, Jordan. Jordan, that's a pretty impressive either DVD or book collection. I can't quite tell there behind you.
Yeah, those are Blu-rays, and then over here is CDs.
Okay, either way, impressive nonetheless.
Yeah, sorry I'm quiet. I just I don't really have much to contribute to specific Christian doctrines. So.
Oh, okay. Well, they didn't ask me when they canonized Scripture. I might have wanted to contribute a few chapters. There's an interesting group, and I don't think they actually have a full English translation yet. But there's a branch of Christianity. It's called Tawahido. I might be mispronouncing it. It's Ethiopian in origin, and they've a branch of Christianity, and they have 88 books in their canon. Not just the Apocrypha that you find in the Roman Catholic Church. They have totally other ones that were not included by anybody else. So I always find it interesting to ask Christians when they talk about inspiration of Scripture. It seems to me to imply not just inspiration of Scripture, but also inspiration in the canonization of that Scripture, in the selection process. And on what basis do we know, for example, that branch of Christianity that has 88 books didn't get the canon correct, and the early Catholic Church got it wrong, or vice versa?
And so basically, we see. I mean, it was politically advantageous for Constantine to call the Council of Nicaea because it was going to solidify his empire, but it was also theologically necessary because of the various disputes that were happening within local congregations between what books churches held as authoritative and which ones they thought were useful. And that tended to differ in a lot. But there was a synthesis in books that they really appreciated, and so you have this, the formulation of the canon, and there were specific criteria that they followed that were part of the reason why they ended up in Scripture. One of the parts was apostolic authorship. So you have all the epistles of Paul included, and you have closeness. Whether or not the apostles endorsed some of these writings, and so there are early references in one of the epistles about one of the Gospels. I think it is Mark that is referenced as being, authoritative. And so there was essentially an agreement that was made among multiple ministers of the faith from multiple churches in multiple areas, and that was essentially where it was made. I mean, it was. A lot of it. I mean, the big problem was Gnosticism, because Gnosticism had developed alongside Christianity, and there was a lot of trash going around that people were believing as truth. And so a lot of it and I mean, you see that in the councils that followed, rooting out the heretical views that were not a part of apostolic doctrine. And so that was the big debate. what constitutes apostolic doctrine. And a lot of these other gospels, Gospel of Barnabas and a few others, Gospel of Thomas, didn't line up with apostolic doctrine, and so they were thrown out. And a lot of them had a late writing. The earliest writings that we have, the canon is based off of very early writings. A lot, like the Gospel of Thomas, doesn't arrive on the scene until about 200 years after, Mark's already out, and a lot of the letters are already out. So.
Well, but one of the things you said there, one of the criteria being apostolic authorship, and yet most biblical scholars today, would seriously challenge the authorship of a lot of those books. And so, does that not imply possibly that either the original that some of those books that were chosen because they were thought to be apostolic in origin should not have been chosen by that criteria, because now we recognize that though we're not written by.
Yeah, Martin Luther took issue with some of the books.
Hebrews, James.
Yeah. He took issue with James, and he took issues with Jude.
Jude, yeah.
I understand his argument. I, however, take a view in an inspired nature of the canon as well. So,
the other answer that I heard to this was a Matthew Bell answer actually, and I was okay. It was interesting, but his answer sort of is I don't want to say it's a hand waving away of the issues, but it's rather that it is reasonable to presume that God would have protected the transmission of His word. Therefore, whatever we ended up with, regardless of the process intervening, is what He wanted us to have. Therefore, it's correct.
I've heard that argument too. And inerrancy of Scripture is based on it is inerrant in the autographa, in the original writings. And the original writings are what came first. And what was closest to apostolic doctrine, and so I'm comfortable with the canon as it stands, based on this concept of apostolic doctrine.
Okay.
And I think that's why I hold Paul in the most esteem with the Pauline epistles. Even sometimes a little bit more than the Gospels themselves, because the Gospels, often, Mark, the physician, for example, he's researching, this, and he's trying to create a compilation of these events that happened. It tells us a story. Matthew, they all have specific purposes. They're all the Gospels were all catered to specific audiences. I think the canon is right where it should be, though.
Okay. Yep. All right.
If I may put in my 2 cents here. I find that the dating aspect, that are earlier versus later, though it is somewhat meaningful, I think is largely problematic, because when you look at religious traditions as a whole, for most of recorded history, they were transmitted orally, and what was written down was often not very easily transmittable, and they would have only had very small amounts of those things written. And it does stand to reason that if you're looking at a later writing, that could be a later copy of earlier copies. And some of that we won't ever know if there were earlier copies. Some suggest that they were written earlier, but some don't suggest either.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The big issue is you have direct contradictions of. Some of the so-called Gospels would stand in direct opposition to what Paul was trying to sort out, especially some of the Judaizing heresies that he calls Peter out on. the docetism that was prevalent that you see in the letter for First John. I mean, we have to understand that these letters were written in an environment where Christianity had arrived on the scene and was instantly being infused into the larger culture, and the larger culture was trying to contribute as well. And I mean, and you see that perfect in Gnosticism and all of its various forms. I mean, this is an attempt to combine Greek philosophy and Judaic religion.
Sure.
Well, I find it interesting, and it may not be having a real meaning in the long run, but I do find it interesting that it seems that none of the New Testament authors, at least not by their writing, none of them seem to be aware of the fact that they are being utilized by God to communicate to man. That this concept of inspiration, the concept of authority of what they wrote, doesn't seem to actually be impressed on them. At least not, you can't. I don't see that anywhere in their writings. There doesn't seem to be, not like the prophets of the Old Testament, not writing with that type of authority. It seemed that the authority that they wrote with was more like Paul did. He has to constantly defend himself when he's writing these letters to the churches, saying, I did this, I was here, I was this. He kept having to buttress his own position as a leader of the churches. And that may not be really meaningful ultimately, but I do find that interesting.
Well, I would disagree with that.
Yeah, I would disagree with that as well.
Okay.
There's multiple verses that talk about a conscious understanding that what they are writing is to be believed. I mean, Paul does this, I think, like twice or three times. I'm trying to find the verses.
Okay. I mean, besides the Timothy, all scriptures, given by inspiration,
Yeah.
but that's not necessarily, doesn't imply that he's talking about his own writing.
In John 14:26,
Okay.
Christ is talking to his disciples, talking about that he's about to leave, he's about to ascend into heaven, and that when he leaves, another helper, another counselor, he's talking about the Holy Spirit at that point. And basically Christ says, and I'll just read the verse 26, but the helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you. And I think that's really important, that the Holy Spirit actually will come to them and inspire them to remember all the things Christ taught to the disciples, so they could record those things and give it to the churches.
Well, I'm not. Yeah, I guess it may be splitting a hair here, but yeah, I don't have a problem with the idea that the people who wrote this were trying to accurately record an historical account of what they experienced.
No.
But I don't think that's necessarily the same thing as saying that they carry this sort of divine authority in terms of what they are writing down.
Yeah.
There's another verse that Peter was talking about Paul's writings and gave it that.
Yeah. Can I read that verse?
Yeah, please.
It's 2 Peter 3:16. And he says, it's part of a sentence here, as he does in all his letters, when he speaks in them of these matters, there are some things in them that are hard to understand, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction, as they do the other scriptures. And so in 2 Peter, you have this understanding that the letters, the epistles that have been written, are scripture, and are in line with the Old Testament.
Okay, it's a reasonable argument.
That's the best. I mean, that is the best one there is from Scripture that I know of for the authority of the epistles.
Okay. It is approaching midnight very quickly, and I'm going to turn into a pumpkin. So, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. I got to get a little sleep for tomorrow morning. I hope I catch up with you guys again. Reuven, thank you very much, bud, for hosting this, too. And I guess that's it.
Yeah, it's nice talking to you. Have a good one.
Okay, you too. Bye.
So who's hosting this?
Reuven hosts this. He types in the side chat.
Oh, okay. Okay. Fair enough.
I assist.
Gosh, Royven, you have an answer for every single thing that anyone has ever said. Everything's a forgery. All history doesn't make any sense.
The earlier point I was actually sort of trying to get to as a compromise between the problem of the Gnostics is that I feel that Gnosticism is a different religion.
It is.
In the way that perhaps Jainism is different than Hinduism and Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And if history went differently, I wouldn't see it as being unreasonable to say that Gnosticism could have developed into its own thing. But the way that things were at the time during the Hellenistic period, it was not reasonable for such a thing. It wasn't plausible for it to develop as such. Church authority wanted to have ultimate church authority over Christian doctrine.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we need to realize also is that Gnosticism always has existed and has continued to exist in small forms.
Sure, the Cathars existed in France, and there was an Albigensis crusade against them.
Yep.
That was thousands of years later, a few thousand years later.
Even in early America, I mean, these guys who were coming to found independent religious orders, like Conrad Weisel. I mean, his whole concept of his quadrinity, based off of Sophia and Christ, was based on Gnosticism, Gnostic writings that he had read. That's what got him thrown out of the church that he was a part of in Germany.
Well, obviously my area of expertise is alternative spirituality, but though I focus more on traditional polytheism, I'm very well aware of religions that are effectively rooted in Hellenistic religions. And pretty much any occult tradition that I could discuss with you is ultimately Hermetic. Because Hermeticism is probably one of the few Hellenistic traditions that actually managed to survive in some form, and ultimately is in itself, if only partially, Gnostic, maybe little g, perhaps not big G, largely because it's so incredibly syncretic. Hermeticism is a mixture of pretty much everything that had existed at the time, and you see different varying degrees that lean more towards esoteric Christian, and more towards a more pagan kind of context. Rosicrucianism, for instance, in a lot of early Golden Dawn is much more on the Gnostic side, whereas a lot more modern post-Hermetic religions like Thelema are much more heavily Hermetic. So it is definitely interesting, and ultimately, if we're really getting down to the brass tacks of this, Gnosticism did survive. It survived underground and became occultism. So that's probably how it should be. If you look at it in the broad scheme of things, those who developed Gnosticism, who continued it underground, did produce something, a whole strain of different religious traditions well into the Renaissance, the Enlightenment period, into the Victorian period, where basically pretty much all occult tradition roots itself in the modern day. So yeah, it did survive.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we forget, like when you study Christianity, you tend to follow the story of orthodoxy, from where it began through the councils to the creeds and confessions of the church, etc. And in the same way, at that time there was also spin-offs, and I think we do this in our own cultural narrative. From and at least if you're in the American education system, you really start with the Enlightenment, because everyone was dark and didn't know anything, and then they discovered science and rejected Christianity and religion, and so they came into this zenith, and secular humanism and beyond, where we are today, and so, but again, it sort of makes this the dominant narrative tends to pretend like other narratives didn't exist. And so in the same way, when you read the story of Orthodoxy and you see Gnosticism developing early, and then there were a whole bunch of battles and ecumenical councils over Gnostic ideas, and then they were sort of shut out and gone. Well, no, people still believe that kind of stuff in their own little circles. And in the same way, people, not everyone embraced secular humanism when it arrived on the scene. In fact, many groups of people don't embrace it, myself included. So, I mean,
well, it goes
it's
both
all
ways.
those historical lenses that you wish to use.
It goes both ways. For instance, if you look at the 20th century and the development of postmodern philosophy, you had just as many existentialists who were atheists as you did Christian. Some of the most notable existentialist philosophers were actual Christians. And you see evidence of this of more modern pantheistic movements. There's a whole Christian pantheism movement. You get the idea. There's definitely some significant levels of, and varieties of diversity that exist within philosophical thought. It's not simple. And people who try to make things simple find themselves overwhelmed with the actual material they claim to be representing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's how I tend to view it, and I've talked to you about this before, Jonathan. From my perspective, within alternative spirituality, I feel that so few people don't give credit to difference. That it is valid and meaningful for there to be differences. That just because a person might go more towards a more hermetic or Gnostic view doesn't mean that everyone else has to. If for anything else, the difference actually helps you to better understand your own position.
Yeah.
So I think there should be so much hatred. You may have disagreements, but you should have a level of respect to understand that there are very good academic and historical reasons why Gnostic or Hermetic is very different than mainstream or historical Orthodox Christianity. Just to use as one example, obviously.
No, yeah, and I mean, when you think about Protestantism and Catholicism, I mean, we wouldn't understand Catholicism as it is today if it weren't for the Reformation, because they had to literally, Catholics had to define themselves as a, okay, well, what do we actually hold to, because of all these objections the Protestants were making.
And you see echoes of this in other spiritual traditions and other periods of time. For instance, a lot of modern Hinduism is as it is, largely as a response to the formation of Buddhism. So a lot of ideas were refined and given proper voice in Hindu reforms in response to that. In the same way, or in the Hellenistic period, the very word that I use for my tradition, Hellenismos, was derived by Julian the Apostate, who was the last pagan emperor who tried to revive Greek religion. And a lot of people in the Reconstructionist movement, like myself, we rely on some of his works, which are very notably biased through a Neoplatonic lens, as not every single Greek was a Neoplatonist. Some were Stoics, some are hedonists. There's a whole host of different things. But knowing that the difference that largely was made through Platonism, that's particularly the difference between Greek religion and Roman religion. Roman religion much more commonly had a bias towards Stoicism, because Stoicism was probably one of the most popular philosophical traditions in Rome. Hence the fact that one of our most notable Stoic philosophers was Marcus Aurelius, and his meditations are still read today. So knowing those differences is very, very valuable, and knowing what historical occurrences brought about that understanding, brought about that difference.
Yeah, and I mean, the Hellenism, in all of its various forms, was very, I mean, it was still very much in vogue, well into, the modern era. It was Oh my gosh! Even when Augustine, I mean, when he was a lecturer in Italy. When he converted, he was thrown out of the academy because he embraced Christianity. Because the faculty were all pagans, and they wouldn't have him.
Well,
And
there are clear evidences to this fact. It's conservative estimate, but in the Byzantine Empire, which existed after Rome fell, there were polytheists of various different bents, particularly Greek and Egyptian, who existed in the Byzantine Empire and were still practicing a form of the earlier religion into the 12th century.
Yeah.
Not the 13th. So it does definitely stand to reason. And most definitely in the north, you had that with Germanic and Celtic polytheism to a lesser extent. And actually the Baltic forms, particularly Lithuanian, existed into, we believe, the 17th century. It was a contiguous practice. So yeah, it was not this easy transition that we can sometimes look at through the lens of Christian apologetics, that as soon as Christianization occurred, that everything else was wiped clean. But and I would do you a favor in this one. Every culture has done that. When a new temple was built upon another temple by another culture, they definitely sort of wiped the slate clean and tried to sort of erase the other history, because if for nothing else, cultures like themselves. They like their own culture. That's kind of human nature.
Yeah. I remember I was studying, I think it was Persia, and it was one of the Persian leaders who said that he was the king of Iran and the king of non-Iran. The whole world is his footstool.
And obviously, speaking from my experience and my focus and study in Hellenismos, you definitely see this in Greece. But to use them as an example here, that was not universally felt. The sentiment that everyone who was non-Greek was a barbarian was particularly and most strongly held among the aristocracy. It served to solidify their own position and their own power, to think that anyone who was not Greek was useless. It was, if or anything else, was for slaves or was for resources that they needed. But because, and particularly with Greece and a lot of cultures in the Mediterranean, they relied on the technologies of the North, and in other quote-unquote barbarian cultures, particularly metallurgy, raw materials like wood and furs, things like that, there was considerable trade going on. And you see evidence of the fact that they did have more sympathetic views. The Greeks took a lot from the Egyptians, they took a lot from the Persians and the Babylonians, and from those cultures in the Levant, as well as the North, Celtic cultures in particular, pre-Roman Celtic cultures, which we don't know a whole heck of a lot about, to be fair. So it was never totally black and white. It wasn't necessarily Greece is only Greece, fuck everyone else. That was a view, and it was widely held. But you also have to keep in mind what was written down and who was writing it. It doesn't always evidence the whole culture. And I think we need to, at some point when we're being honest academically, to look at the material, talk about what we do know, and be honest about what we don't. That's the only way to proceed forward. That's the only way to be logical and rational.
Yeah.
So Kevin, what's your worldview? You named it before, and I missed it.
The name for, well, one of the most prominent names for my tradition is Hellenismos. It's the long version of it is Hellenic polytheistic reconstructionism. It's a subset of modern neo-paganism that tries to, as reasonably as can be done in the modern era, historically reconstruct Greek religion from the classical period, from the end of the Archaic period to the beginning of Alexander's reign in 323 BC, I believe.
Okay.
That's a general focus, though it does considerably bleed into the Hellenistic period, as there are some definite ideas that came out of that period which were still clearly Hellenic. But there's ultimately a layer. You can go a little bit towards the past, a little bit towards the future, but you want to stay clearly in that region. In the same way that if you're practicing a specific form of Christianity that developed in a specific historical period, that's going to be your central focus.
Sure.
What defines my tradition as different to perhaps other pagan traditions is largely the fact that it's rooted in a single culture and uses Reconstructionism as a methodology, trying to using archaeology, physical anthropology, linguistics to practice more authentically, as we would see it, a specific cultural tradition.
Okay. How big is that movement?
It's pretty small. It's starting to form in Greece now, but it's mostly confined to Western countries. You see a lot of movement in Western Europe and particularly in the United States where I live. Once again, it's a subset. We like to Reconstructionists as a whole are a subset within modern neo-paganism. Wicca is the most common pagan tradition you'll probably interact with, and
Right, yeah.
albeit a more eclectic, solitary variant of it, and not as traditional. But we are a movement. We exist mostly online, to be honest, because it's been like that since the early '90s, since we really started to take off. So.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You said you gave the name, but you said you're neo-Hellenistic or
no
neo-paganism. Go ahead. Better explain that for me.
It's difficult to say because a lot of traditional polytheists, whether you're talking ancient Greek, Egyptian, Norse, Celtic, we tend to view the term pagan a little negatively because what does pagan mean?
Right.
So we usually prefer to call ourselves polytheist or polytheistic Reconstructionists.
Right.
But living in the real world, the rest of academia considers polytheistic traditions, modern reconstructions or revivals of them, to be a part of the neo-pagan movement. Neo meaning new, pagan meaning rural religions, polytheistic, indigenous spiritual traditions, or modern ones rooted in those ideas.
Right.
It's an umbrella.
Right. And you brought up Wicca before, but Wicca, people who practice Wicca aren't necessarily polytheistic. They could be atheist, or
that's a very fringe element within Wicca, but yes, they tend to be what we would typically call soft polytheists or henotheists. They tend to view deity as ultimately being one, or duotheistic. Wicca believes in something called the god and the goddess, or the lord and lady, sort of divine, a spiritual godhead, a being of male and female, light and dark. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Not something that I particularly know a whole heck of a lot about. Maybe not as perhaps as somebody who's a lineaged Wiccan, but yeah, I try to educate myself as much as I can on various different religious traditions.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
All right, guys, I'm gonna head out. I gotta wake up early tomorrow for various trainings.
Okay, it was great talking to you. Take care of yourself and enjoy yourself.
Yep, you too. Have a good one.
So, Rocco, have you ever been in this hangout before?
No, I'm actually kind of new to Google Hangouts altogether, so.
Understood. Interfaith is a Google Hangout that Reuven and I host every Monday between 6:30 and 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Okay, I'm Eastern, so.
Yeah, so I always do PST because we have people from everywhere.
Sure, yeah.
It's hosted every Monday, and we try to have a civil conversation with people from various different traditions, and we've had a lot. We've had Christians, Sufis, a few atheists and agnostics, quite a few pagans, occultists. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of Eastern religion. Like to see a few more Hindus and Buddhists giving their perspective, because that's definitely an area many of us in the West don't know a whole lot about. But we try to produce an environment that doesn't become the Great Debate, which is a name that a lot of people have used for the kinds of very heated arguments between very hardcore Christians and militant atheists. So it was largely created as a safe space. It was an earlier idea that we'd had at a previous website, Stickam, way back in the day. Ruben and I had ran it at some point. And that's what it is. We try to keep it academic. We open the floor to different discussions. Sometimes they're not even religious discussions. But it's really for understanding. It's, standard interfaith. And people can have differences of opinion. I've had differences of opinion from other people, of members of alternative spirituality, which you would think have far less means for argument, but they're there.
Sure.
And that's really the point, so that everybody can better understand different spiritual traditions.
Okay. Yeah, that's your title intrigued me to come in and just hear a little bit. So.
I'm glad you were able to come in, and you can kind of come and go as you please. You don't have to come in. There's like a deadline to get your ticket. But we host it every Monday, and it's been good. It's a little different every time you come in. Conversations are a bit different. Sometimes there's not much conversation, but.
Okay. Yeah. Reuven asked me what do I believe. Well, I'm a Christian.
Okay.
I'd probably be on one of those hardcore Christians. But yeah, I'm Reformed. That would probably be the best way to describe it. I'm a Reformed Christian Protestant. So.
Well, there's only one question, and I would ask the same question to a militant atheist as I would ask to a Christian. Is it more important for you to examine and discuss your ideas than it is to try to convince somebody of yours?
Well, you would honestly, for me, both.
So if a reasonable opportunity presents itself, that somebody seems receptive to hearing what you have to say,
right?
You're discussing
I actually do I'm a Christian. I do Christian apologetics out on the street and stuff. But I'm not, I don't yell and scream at people. I open dialogue. I actually want to know what the person believes, so I can understand where they're coming from, and basically, have that conversation. Kind of have that debate, but not like the great debate where one side's just screaming at each other. So, I mean, in my faith, we're commanded to preach all that Christ taught us, and that includes preaching the gospel to other people. So, I mean, I value that because it is a tenet of Christianity. I mean, it was a command. But you have to understand where others are coming from. And I think we see that in examples in the Bible, of course, that I look at as authoritative. We see Paul going first into the synagogues and trying to explain to the Jews then how Christ was in the Old Testament and he's the Messiah promised in the Old Testament. So he's using their worldview to show them how Christ is the Messiah that was promised. But then when Paul was talking to the pagans, for lack of a better word at that time, on Mars Hill, he was using their thoughts and really kind of turning them around on each other to then prove Christ, to prove that worldview. So that's why I said both, because I takes both, and I believe that I'm following my religion by explaining the gospel to others.
Sure. Well, speaking from the position of somebody who's a non-Christian theist, but you also would get this obviously from atheists and agnostics.
Sure.
We come from the position that, and many of us, definitely not everyone, that we've already heard the gospel. We've heard different varieties, many of us, many different varieties of Christianity, and we've already come to our conclusion. You may believe that there may be another opportunity somewhere else down the line where a person will hear it and actually engage with the gospel and convert, but most of us, we have come to this sort of conclusion. And there's a line. There's a line in the sand. And most Christians I'll interact with, they understand that line. They may present certain opportunities, and they may want to evangelize to a certain extent. The problem that we have, and is largely the issue, as I've said, both with Christians and with atheists, is that they don't honor that line. They continually and repeatedly cross that line and just assault people. They're offensive. They're not making a safe and welcome environment for people to discuss things.
Right.
And it's particularly the case when you're just walking around in public with your friends at a movie theater and somebody's going up to you and basically just, assaulting you with these ideas that they were not there to do. They were just there to watch a movie. Right. So obviously in a group like this, it's a little harder to make that justification because, well, we're talking about religion.
Right.
And it's also online.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to waste my time. If we're having a conversation and you're like, well, I don't want to hear it, well, why should I continue? I'm just wasting my breath.
Well, there's a few...
I mean, I'm not saying you would do that, but, I mean, that's my attitude. I'm not... I mean, if you're tired of hearing what I'm saying, and I'm saying you generally in any situation,
sure.
I'm probably not going to waste my breath because my time's valuable too, so.
Exactly.
And I don't believe I can convert anybody. I mean, I believe through, Scripture tells us that, God opens up people's eyes. And it's through preaching the gospel, but it's nothing I'm going to do. So,
yeah.
And I know it's not my Hangout, but if this was my Hangout and you came on to my Google Hangout, our discussion would probably be a little bit different. And I'm respecting this Hangout because it's not mine.
Out of respect, and if you were hosting a Christian Hangout, I wouldn't go in the first place because I wouldn't want an argument.
Right.
It's not. I respect myself and I respect other people too much to engage in that sort of discussion.
Okay.
Welcome, Ocean.
Yo.
We had Jonathan in here earlier. Carlton was also in here. Green Soul was in and out. He didn't talk a whole lot, but he listened in. So, and we have Jordan here, who's fairly new, and Rocco is also here. He's fairly new. So.
Cool. I'm old hat.
Fair enough.
Been around for a minute at this point.
Gotcha. So how you been?
Been all right.
Seemed pretty busy lately.
Yeah, I've been flying all over the place and doing random shit.
It's for music, for business, in general?
Business and pleasure, so.
Very cool.
Yep.
Very cool. That's pretty cool. Earlier, before the hangout started, I was actually a bit late. I was able to hang out with an old friend who's kind of on our side of the fence with these sorts of things. And it was interesting. We had a very interesting philosophical and spiritual conversation. I also got to meet his girlfriend, who's starting to get into a lot of the same sorts of things. And he's living closer to the area now, and he actually wants to have discussions and maybe play some chess or backgammon or cards or whatever. Walk the park. He's a little bit further out. I think he's 15 or 20 minutes from where I am, but he thinks that it's a much better investment of time if there's conversation. If you can drive out and have a good time and discuss interesting things, that it's worth his drive. So we're gonna hang out again next Monday before the hangout. So might be a regular thing. I think it'd be pretty cool.
That's good.
Yeah. Little nice things like that. Small things. It's the small things that matter,
And some of that communal stuff that you're looking for, I know that.
Yeah, even if they're from different aspects and different traditions, it's definitely valuable because there's a lot to be gained from that sort of discourse.
Yeah, it's part of why me and you keep talking. So.
Yeah, he's a heathen, so, and he's starting to engage more in Seether, sort of a variety of Norse shamanism. He's still learning, so a lot of his affect and a lot of the ways he describes it are clear to somebody who's a bit more of a beginner, but he's got the enthusiasm, which is really good. So many people get jaded. Also, what else was I going to say? Did I tell you that I was trying to do a sort of a pagan group out here, like a discussion thing?
Yeah, you've mentioned it a couple times.
Yeah, it's been really lackluster. We haven't been getting a lot of participation. I guess people are just really busy lately. But we've had a few cool people come. A lot of college kids who have some free time. A few older people who've been in the traditions for a while. It's been good. It's just it sucks for the group leader, the lady who's running the group. She's very traditional Wicca, old school. Like she's been doing it, I think, 30 years, and she's starting to question whether it's worth it. I mean, she's not well-to-do. It's difficult for her to ride the bus down, but it's local to where she is. But if we're not getting a lot of participation, I don't know if she wants to keep paying the price for the meetup group. So I don't know. Figured I'd give it a try. I've been doing it helping her out for about 6 months or so. So it might turn into something. I don't know. But I'm not holding my breath. Welcome back.
I guess I'll talk a little bit if I can. I want to talk kind of just in general, speaking about kind of what Rocco was talking about, and as far as Christianity, Reformed theology, things like that. I definitely think he's right as far as, again, I'm not a Christian, so I'll put that out there. But I come from that background, so I understand where you're coming from. But a lot of what the Bible teaches and what Jesus Christ teaches, very much so, is based upon going out there and trying to preach and convert people and things like that. But I also think, too, in the same sense, that the way that that people go about trying to convert people or what have you is probably not the same way Christ would have done it or would have wanted it. I don't know if Christ would want you to stand outside of a grocery store and yell at people and try to convert them. I'm not saying you do, but other Christians that may do that. I don't think that that's probably what Jesus had in mind, just based upon reading scriptures from the Bible. And I'm talking specifically from personal experience. I mean, I come from a very, very fundamentalist background. Born and raised a Christian, about 20 years. My last stint with it was within Calvinism, Reformed theology. And specifically that group, I don't think it's, and pardon if it offends, but I don't think it's as dangerous as just being a fundamentalist Christian, but there are some dangerous doctrines within that particular branch of theology that I think could steer some Christians or people that want to become a Christian in kind of a bad direction.
Can you name a few?
Sure. I would say, one of the main things is, and I guess it all depends on how you believe in it and how you understand it and what have you, or teach it. But I would say probably like predestination. Now, that's a really complicated one, and I don't want to get too far into it because I'm a little rusty. But my understanding as far as Calvinism is, you're funny, Reuben. My understanding as far as predestination is, now there are some Calvinists, and people tend to call them hyper-Calvinists if they believe that that God predestines some unto hell. Now, I wouldn't say that would be hyper-Calvinism. Now I need to explain why.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's hyper-Calvinism at
because because it actually, that's pretty much what Calvin taught and what a lot of people probably such as yourself, maybe even believe the Bible teaches. Now, I don't think it's hyper-Calvinism simply because if, according to Calvinism, from my understanding, and according to some parts of the Bible, if you take it in that way, God has predestined some unto salvation, as Romans 9 states, and then some have been predestined unto damnation. Now, a lot of people kind of can't, what have you, like, they can't really explain that to people because it's, that's kind of a hard thing to explain to somebody, if you're, especially if somebody in your shoes, you're trying to be an apologist. That's going to be a little difficult to explain, and can get people angry. And
yeah, that's usually something I don't really get into when I'm doing apologetics or evangelizing.
Okay.
I mean, I don't. I mean, I bring up hell because obviously, as a Christian, I believe that belief in Christ leads to eternal salvation, whereas disbelieving in Him leads to eternal hell. I mean, I believe in hell, but I wouldn't. I don't go into the predestination talk with people I'm evangelizing to. Not because I'm trying. Not because I'm trying to hide it. It's just something. It's something that doesn't need to be talked about.
Right.
I'm talking. I'm preaching. I'm preaching the gospel, and I don't know who is chosen and who is not. So I preach to everybody as I am commanded. So.
This is a Bible passage that I quote to people who are getting uppity about me not wanting to be preached to. Matthew 6:1-6. Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. And show the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what the right is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand praying in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
Okay, how does that verse? Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, the charismatic preacher who is practically praying in public and quoting Bible verse and getting up in people's faces, being righteous, being self-righteous, to be seen by other people. That admonishes those people, that teaches them humility, that it's not always warranted, and that they should look at the reasons why they're doing what they are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you could read that verse in context, and I think, Christ is using the word hypocrite a lot, and of course he uses the word hypocrite talking about the Pharisees a lot, who professed faith with their lips, but inwardly they were. Christ called them sons of Satan. So yeah, I would say that that's really what the verse is talking about. People like, oh, look what I'm doing, I'm so good, but behind the scenes they're really just evil people, and that's really what the verse is talking about.
And the kinds of people that do that are the kinds of people who are trying to justify their own behavior, saying how good they are, and making everyone else feel bad about how evil they are.
Right. Well,
not looking at their own sin.
Right. Well, yeah, that's hypocritically. And when I preach, I'm the chief of sinners. Even Paul said that, who wrote pretty much half the New Testament. So, I always say that, we are all sinners, including myself. And I'm not nowhere near perfect. But, the only difference between me and a non-believer is that my sins are atoned for in Christ. For my faith in Christ. That's the only difference. But I still sin, and I'm not, I'm not better than anybody else. I understand how people could be offended by the charismatic street preacher saying, really talking about sin in a way that makes everybody feel like he's unsinful and everybody else is. But that's not usually how I go about it at all.
The only thing that speaking about the set of verses here that Kevin put, um, and then as far as interpretation, everything, that's one thing, and it's not localized to Christianity. It could be in Islam, or it could be in Judaism, Mormonism. Probably not so much in. Well, I can't say that there are many different branches of Mormonism. But the thing that happens is that Kevin could look at those verses and Kevin sees something, and then maybe you look at it and you see something, and then I'll look at it and I see something different. Reuven may look at it and see something different, and then the Baptists believe it's something different. So the thing is, though, is that from my experience within Calvinism, and it could be different among different people that call themselves Reformed. I refer to myself as Reformed as well, but you could also term it as a Calvinist or what have you. But really though, if you really think about it, at least in my view, when I was believing in that, I and it's very egotistic. But I believed everybody else that wasn't a Calvinist, needed to be a Calvinist or needed to be reformed because their view of certain scriptures was incorrect. Now, who am I? Speaking about myself, who am I to believe or to say that I am the one that had the correct interpretation? Who am I to say that? This verse means this or that verse means that. That's what is so different about Christianity and certain branches within it, is that they are, well, maybe not the only religion, but one of the most popular for sure, that believes this is the only way, and if you don't believe this, you will be punished for this. And and that's fine to believe that, and it's fine to preach it, and it's definitely within your right to do so. But I just think it's a little, I don't know what you would call it, extremist, I guess. I mean, you don't seem extremist personally. I mean, talking to you, you seem like a good guy. Most people I talk to that are Christian, they're decent people. Don't have any issues with them. But it would be the same thing. I mean, who knows? It's just I don't know. It's very interesting to me, especially coming from that background and knowing a lot about that. Again, I'm not really fresh on it right now because it's been a good while since I've studied anything or even read anything in a Bible. But from just experience, that's some of my thoughts on it. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you're interpreting the Bible, the biggest thing, or really interpreting anything, is to keep it in the context that it's written in. I mean, I can pick a Bible verse that says there is no God. Now, that's certainly taken out of context, and I can use it as a proof text for something else. But yeah, mostly you keep everything in its historical, grammatical context in order to attribute a meaning to that. And the reason why I'm a Calvinist is because I studied the original languages. The original Greek. I didn't study Hebrew yet, but in studying Greek, those doctrines become way more apparent, and the meanings of the verses are much more, open. Not open in the sense of open up to interpretation, but they're very clear. But yeah, I mean, you gotta keep things in the grammatical, historical context, and I think that's some Christian denominations tend to have their pet doctrines, and then they just read into the text their doctrines, um, rather than letting Scripture speak for itself. But that's a different topic.
Okay, Cool. Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that that there is, you know, and I would say that you do have to take a lot of that in context, and certain things you can't just pull out of context. I would agree, but again, it's kind of this in the same vein there. A lot of people do have a valid point. I'm not one of the people that does that, but that brings up some of the verses in Deuteronomy or Leviticus or something like that. You know, and why don't you do this? Why don't you follow this? And again, the Christian's explanation is usually, well, Christ has fulfilled the Old Testament, so therefore we don't follow this law and that law and what have you. I wanted to answer Reuven's question about free will, even though I know it wasn't directed at me. But my understanding of free will within Calvinism or Reformed theology is basically that you are free to sin. If you're free to do whatever sin you want, you're free to do this, you're free to do that, but your free will does not triumph over God's will, and God doesn't will you to sin, but the good things that you do are because of God's will. I mean, I think I kind of have some of that right. Maybe not all of it, but yeah, that's kind of my understanding of it, or at least I believe what I had believed previously. By the way, I really like this new microphone, and hopefully it sounds pretty good too.
Yeah, it sounds good. I have kind of a crappy one.
Sorry about that. I was catching up on a few messages. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, people are going to interpret verses differently, particularly if they're outside of Christianity. They're going to interpret it within a very, very different lens. And I'm not saying that what I was saying by putting that quote was speaking to Christian doctrine necessarily, but speaking to my own personal reason as a person why I feel the way that I do about that, about the issues that were discussed. But yeah.
So what's everybody do for work and employment, or what do you guys do? I'll go first. I am for the past year I have been working kind of in a call center. But what's cool about my job is specifically it allows me to work remotely. So I actually work from home, and I was promoted within my first 6 months. Basically, it's just basic customer service. It's like a technical support position, taking phone calls, trying to make sales, things like that. And I was promoted at my 6-month mark to a senior consultant, and now I kind of assist with helping the development of other agents. So it's pretty fun. I enjoy it. I even enjoyed talking with customers, but if anybody's ever been in customer service or retail, you can kind of understand how that can go sometimes. It's not always the most pleasant experience, but I enjoy it nonetheless. I don't have to interact with customers now, which is kind of a a good thing. But you know, yeah. What about everybody else? Since I'm new here.
I don't work. It's complicated.
Yeah, I got laid off not too long ago, so I was in the oil and gas industry doing title research.
Okay, cool. The town that I specifically live in here in California is um, it's a big oil oil town, and like when the gas prices were tanking, there was lots of people around here that were getting laid off because of the way the gas prices went. But ever since, it has steadily increased, which I guess is good for them. A lot of people, there's people on both sides of the fence. They're like, oh, I want lower gas prices, but these other people are like, no, I'm losing my job, and then the gas prices go up. They're like, no, I don't want to pay that much for gas, and then I'm sitting here with a Prius and I don't care.
Yeah, the whole downfall is all because of OPEC. They're the reason why gas prices fell so low. They did it. They did it to try to get all these new oil and gas companies to go out of business because they knew American companies can't make I mean, they break even around $45. So if it go a barrel of oil. So if it goes below that, they're losing money. And if they do that for enough for time period, long enough time period, these gas companies here domestically are going to go down, and then OPEC can start skyrocketing the prices again.
I know you mentioned Stickam earlier, Kevin. I know that I probably joined that room a handful of times. I used Stickam quite a bit back in the day. Like I'm talking like 08, 09 ish. I don't know if that's around when you're doing your thing, but maybe even 07 a little bit. But yeah, I remember I think joining that group a couple of times. I know they also had like a specifically like Christian rooms that I used to join with a bunch of Christian folks that I knew from YouTube. Sometimes they had people from other faiths and stuff. It wasn't debate faith that I was in, Reuben, though I did join that one here and there. But before I became Reformed, I would say I was just a fundamentalist Christian. I wasn't really like well versed in arguments and how to like defend what I believed in or anything. So, yeah, I think I remember this particular interfaith. I think I remember joining it probably a handful of times. So.
We did actually run a group by the same name, Interfaith. And the symbol that Reuven has on his dock was actually one of the symbols that was used on the main page. So, and I've since created a bigger symbol with more faiths represented that's used on the Google page as well as the Facebook page. And Yeah. So, yeah, Debate Faith was definitely one of the bigger ones. There were a lot of atheist rooms like that were there to encourage argument, basically. And there were a few interfaith style groups. There was also a pagan one. And there were a few social groups. People kind of just generally talked about whatever. Kind of the regulars of Stickam. And like I said before, a lot of them were YouTube participants or subscribers. And I mean, it was interesting though, the Stickam days, because there were people who were, like B and C list celebrities that would come on, and people that were actually fairly well known. I actually remember having a conversation with Penn Jillette at one point. Pretty nice guy. He's pretty cool. So yeah, it was interesting, and there were bands that were doing stuff there. There were pretty official Stickam rooms. I remember there was a separation between the general webcam type groups and then the more official ones. The big official ones that were being run, it was really just a bunch of people kind of joining in and watching, and there would just be a big huge screen, and sometimes they allowed for certain people to be up on dock, but the standard webcam groups, it was 2 rows of webcams, and you were literally just face to face with different webcam docks. And the thing that was weird about it, for a webcam group, it was almost like the Wild West. There were things that you could do in those rooms that were weird. We also had a few people, I think Rue knows who I'm talking about, who flat out would hack the groups. They would hack the rooms and do all kinds of really messed up stuff in there. Sometimes it was funny. A lot of times it was kind of scary. So, yeah, it's crazy stuff. Yeah, Carbon. I remember that dude. It was weird because, like, he seemed pretty cool with me. I never was on the receiving end of any of it, but I was in some of the groups that Carbon ran. They were more social. But there was almost a hacktivist sentiment in some of his groups, so it was interesting.
I was wondering if I could ask you guys about general Google Hangout stuff. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. What would you like to know?
Well, so I know this is live, so this is going to go on Reuben's YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, which is private. Only people who are subscribed to his channel can see it.
Okay, but I've done other Google Hangouts that wasn't attached to my YouTube account, so like not like a broadcast. Okay.
Yeah, you can do off-air. That's a thing.
Now, can I search for off-air Google Hangouts?
No.
Okay.
The only ones you can search for are ones that were recorded, and only through YouTube channels to which they're being recorded from by the person who recorded it, by the person who started up the on-air hangout.
Okay. Because when I was doing my Google Hangout with friends, I was I didn't make it live. I just had like a normal Google Hangout, but you can make it to the public, and so I was wondering how would the public be able to get into that Google Hangout if it's not on YouTube? Does that make sense?
Well, you see, the Google Hangouts, the way they're sort of structured, particularly the on-air ones, you can just start one up willy-nilly and just invite your friends, but ones that are done through groups, particularly ones that are on air, you have to be a member of the group or invited by somebody who runs the group to even get into it in the first place. So there's certain levels of restrictions based on if you're a member of a specific Google Circle group or not.
Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, I was just curious. Thanks for answering that.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's confusing for everybody who first starts. So, little bit of technical for you. The bar at the top of the Google Hangout. On the far left, I'm sure you're already aware, that's to mute and unmute your mic. Then there's to turn off and turn on your webcam. The one in the middle, most people don't really use. It's adjust bandwidth usage. It's if you're having issues with connection. And the one next to that is settings. That's if you need to adjust your vocal settings, your video, and a few other things. And then obviously
The one that's red, don't touch that one unless you want to leave. That's the hangout button, because it's kind of like a hangout call. Hangouts, and the way it's structured, it's actually a webcam extension of Hangouts. There's an app that you can use through your phone that's connected to the Google Plus service that allows you to chat with different people. So it's a little bit of a synthesis between a messenger and a webcam chat and a group chat, because all of Google's services are bundled together. It's how it's always been since they started. I hope that explains things a bit. There's also something on the left-hand side. There's a bunch of stuff that can be put in their apps, basically. Some of them are only accessible by people running it. There's some cool little games. There's pictures. You can do a draw function. Not a lot of them are very useful, but there's the messenger one, the chat one, that allows you to open up or close the chat bar on the right. And the one below that is screen share, which allows you to share your physical screen on your computer. If there was something that you ever wanted to show somebody, like you had something open. And there's different adjustments you can do: share whole screen, or share a specific screen of a specific app or browser that you have open. Though most people who use it will tell you that the best way is just to share whole screen, because sometimes the other one can be a bit buggy. But you can also do some stuff too on the webcam dock itself. There's something, if you click on that little arrow, it's mute, profile, present to everyone, hide from broadcast. Present from everyone allows you to present whatever you have on your webcam dock. And there are third-party programs that you can buy, Reuven used, or you can download. Some of them are purchased, but that actually allow you to present like a particular image that you wanted to use using your webcam. But there's some cool stuff you can also do using the Hangout toolbox. Hangout toolbox allows you to do some pretty cool stuff, and you can actually see it just changed my dock. I actually have one that I custom created, and it's a banner that has my name on it, a spiritual tradition, and some symbols. I actually produced that manually, but they actually have a regular default overlay that you can use that allows you to just create a very basic one, and you can pretty much type whatever you'd like.
How do you get that banner again?
That's on the left-hand side. There's a bar, and you'll see one that's a red, blue, white, green, and gray. It's got like a tool thing and a Hangout symbol.
Hangout.
Looks like a lunchbox. Yeah. And the first bar that you see is a person in a circle, and you'll see things that says lower third, logo, color, custom overlay, saved presets. And you can create your own banner if you have a webcam running, and it allows you to have this banner over your Hangout. So if you're broadcasting yourself, you can have a little bit of extra information that you can place in there, so people have a little bit more information about you. And you can do different ones. You can create presets, and if you save a preset, it's locked to your account. You can delete it, create a new one, create a bunch of different ones if you like. And so you can use different banners for different things. And obviously, you can also, using custom overlay, you can turn it on and turn it off.
Cool.
Yeah. And you were saying that you have some of your own Hangouts and stuff, so that might help you, particularly if you're having ecumenical conversations with other Christians, to let them know your specific theological or denominational orientation, or just your name if you choose to.
Right. Well, I appreciate all the help. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
What are you drinking there?
Oh, just a Coke. I don't have a lot of soda, but like a once in a while thing. It can be nice. I enjoy it a lot more because I don't have it all the time. I think of it as a dessert.
Yeah.
I find if you think of like the fancy coffees and the sodas as a dessert, it's much easier to properly incorporate it into your diet.
Right.
I
Yeah.
probably have 2 of these a week. Something
Wow.
stupid.
I'm actually I'm a pretty heavy guy, and I drink way too much pop.
I tell you, if you cut it out, you can lose 15 to 20 pounds in a few months.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, but I would have.
It's lifestyle, man. You got to change your whole lifestyle.
Yeah.
I used to be 270 pounds.
Okay.
I'm hovering between 235 and 240 right now. So don't focus so much on the number. Focus on your own physical health, what your body is telling you.
Right. Yeah.
And make your diet simple. Simple is always better because you can adjust from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I just cut out pop, and I got laid off, so I'm a lot less active now. But if I get like a treadmill and start walking and running a little bit.
Don't set yourself up. Do you have any parks near you?
Not really, no.
Can you drive to one?
Yeah, about 30 minutes though.
30 minutes, wow. No parks in 30 minutes, wow. Huh. I guess I'm spoiled.
Yeah, it's a huge this is a huge park. I mean, I could go to like the only parks around here are probably like little parks, like ones you can't really walk around on, and then.
Well, how about your neighborhood? Do you live in like a housing area, like a housing tract type thing with streets, a suburban area?
Yeah, I live in a suburban area. I mean, I can walk the streets. Yeah, I can do that.
Your 2 best friends, a walk that's set that you like a specific route that you could do, and an MP3 player.
Yeah. Well.
Or your phone.
Yeah, the problem is you're from California and you could do that all year round. I'm from Pittsburgh and I can't do that all year round.
Do you have a mall nearby?
About 20 minutes.
Okay. In the winter, when it's cold, do what all the old people do.
Walk around the mall.
Walk around the park. And most malls are built to be 2 stories. You walk one length, you go down the escalator or the elevator, and then walk the other length. And it's a circuit. The malls are designed that way so you can go from place to place. And just commit yourself a few times a week, 15, 20 minutes at a comfortable pace, and just do that semi-regularly. It'll make a huge difference on how you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to deliver for FedEx, and that was good because I was loading and unloading huge boxes and walking up people's steps, and that was good. That was good exercise. But the problem is I drank Coke all day.
Yeah.
Trying to, So I really need to cut out the pop, and I actually have been. I would drink sometimes 3 to 4 20 ounces a day.
I remember when I was working years ago, I was a media reader for the water company. And I remember when I'd be on my route, there'd be this kid. He was really heavy. Couldn't have been more than 16, 17. And he walked to and from school every day, several miles. And even though he's a big guy, he was just in so much better health. He had so much of a better humor about him because he was active. I'm sure that his parents probably said, you really should be active. And got to look at it this way. If you're less active and that's your lifestyle, go to the one thing that human beings are built for, walking. We're built for it. We're not built for running. At least not in long distances. We can definitely sprint. If there's something chasing you, you're going to run. I don't care if you're 250 pounds or 150 pounds, you're going to run. But, too much adrenaline can actually be detrimental to the body. Not to mention all the joint pains and all sorts of problems that you can get from it. But that's why a lot of track runners end up having problems later on. But walking is a fundamental aspect of being a human being. So if you can walk, even if it's only a few times a week for short distances at a slow pace, you're going to be a lot better off all around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I got to do.
Just take the burden off yourself. Take the expectation off of it, and it's just walking.
Yeah.
It's just drinking water instead of drinking soda.
Yeah.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah. But like I said, I've been a lot better. I cut down my pop, I call it pop, my pop intake. I do feel better doing that. But it's just some days I can't. I'm like, I gotta have a Coke, and I get really bad migraines. That's the other thing because of the caffeine.
I gotcha.
So
Well, I think it's.
that's the worst.
I think the thing to do to start is reduce the amount of days that you drink soda, and then reduce the size.
Yeah.
A can, no more than a can. Small can.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Good.
I've been doing like 20 ounce good.
Okay, that's not too bad.
And some days I skip a day and I'm like, this day I need a Coke.
Well, as long as you're not chugging a liter like a water skin, I think you'll be okay.
Yeah. And I switched up to Gatorade, and then I'm going to try to work my way out to water. Or
if you have it around you, and I'm sure you do, it's corporate. You might want to try vitamin water.
Yeah. Well,
lightly flavored.
Yeah.
Not carbonated though.
Yeah. The other thing I want to avoid though is aspartame too.
Oh, aspartame's horrible.
Yeah.
Studies have suggested it's carcinogenic.
Yeah. That I don't. That's why I don't drink diet stuff. I drink the regular stuff.
There's something to be said for juice, man.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they have a whole bunch of sugar in them. A lot of them have a lot of sugar in them too.
Spend a little more, and get natural. Get actual fruit juice. More than 60%.
Well, they have that. Well, even regular fruit has
sure
natural sugar to it.
Fructose, sucrose, all that kind of stuff. Well,
so that's why I went to Gatorade first. I mean, like, it still has the calories and stuff, but it doesn't have any sugar.
Yeah, but you don't want to do too much of it because it has a lot of sodium.
Right. Well, yeah, but I don't drink. But that's the thing. I would drink a lot of Coke, but I don't drink a lot of Gatorade. I can drink like a bottle or two a day.
I'm just saying that you're a bigger guy. If you're having issues, high sodium can actually affect your blood pressure.
Okay.
So just like I said, everything in moderation.
Yeah. Yeah. But like I said, that's to get me down to the water rather than going from pop all the time to straight water.
You're replacing apples with oranges, slowly moving towards it. Maybe tangerines in the middle.
Yeah. Exactly. That's everything in moderation. So. Small steps, baby.
You got to think of it, especially with your diet. It's a palate. You're developing a palate. You slowly kind of acclimate yourself to something different, and then you start realizing, oh wow, this actually tastes good. If you're so used to eating this, and then somebody gives you that, if you're used to eating cheeseburgers, and somebody gives you a stalk of broccoli, you're gonna think, oh, this is fucking bitter, disgusting. Yeah. But if you slowly move towards that, then you'll develop a palate for it, and you'll feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's not the number. It's the way you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm having my first baby here pretty soon in July, so I definitely want to be healthier.
Good. Yeah, because they will wear you out.
Yeah. I might have a lot of exercise running around my house.
Oh, for sure, definitely. But they're wonderful. They're a gift.
Oh, sure, yeah.
If I don't see you before, congratulations. So.
All right. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I were trying for a long time with nothing going on. 5 years, but now.
Yeah, my birth mother, she struggled for years. That's why there's a 10-year gap between my older sister and my older brother. She's 13 years older than me, and in the 80s and late 70s, I mean, they didn't really know as much as they know now about fertility. Mm-hmm. So they have much better treatments now for some of that stuff. But it was rough.
Yeah, that's what we thought we would have to do. We thought we would have to, change her. My wife changed her diet, which means I would have to change my diet. Other things we thought we really, really would have to try, and we were just at that point where we're like, we probably really start, maybe going to the doctor, figuring out what we need to do, start changing our diet, and then we were already my wife was already pregnant. She went almost the whole trimester without even knowing. First trimester, she was pregnant.
Oh wow.
We didn't even know.
Well, the thing is, biochemistry changes as you age. So, how old are you two?
28. She's 26.
Okay, that's not that bad. So, You might get a second or a third. You never know.
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's kind of like a lot of families in my church. We have tons of kids in our church. Tons. You would think we were Mormons. That's how many kids we have in our church. That's but it seems a lot of the women in my church, they years no babies and have the first one and boom, they belted out 6 right after that.
Yep.
So
like I said, there's all sorts of things that can change.
yeah. So, well, it's pretty late here in Pittsburgh, so I'm going to go. I thank you guys for allowing me to be on here. So.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, good luck, guys. Thanks for the advice on the Google Hangouts and the weight loss and all that. So, we'll talk to you later.
Take care.